Namaskar. A very warm welcome to one and all joining us today. My name is Bhumika, and it was great pleasure that I extend a very warm welcome on behalf of the complete Sare, and Eminari team to this second part of the three-part masterclass series on financing green hydrogen in South Asia. This masterclass promises to be an enriching experience packed with insights and knowledge from renowned experts in the field throughout the three sessions. This masterclass spread across 3 days, out of which we have completed one day, and today is the second day. This has been organized by South Asia Regional Energy Hub in collaboration with Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India. South Asia Regional Energy Hub is USAID's coordination and communication platform, which operates under the USAID's Regional Energy Program, the South Asia Regional Energy Partnership, that is known as the SAREP, facilitating coordination and communication of USAID's Clean Edge Asia activities within the region. This initiative aims to sensitize and simplify the green hydrogen sector for stakeholders in the region. The masterclass focuses on imparting a comprehensive understanding of financing the green hydrogen ecosystem that covers topics from basics to green hydrogen costing, economic implications, international progress, and to advanced topics such as contractual considerations, best practices in the risk management. The masterclass is part of SAREF's broader objective of enabling flow of financing in the green hydrogen sector. Earlier this year, we published a report on the investment landscape of green hydrogen in India and organized a capacity building workshop in partnership with ICICI Bank to enhance the capacity of financial institutions and bankers in the green hydrogen sector. First part of this series took place on November 28th, this last month, with key speakers addressing various aspects of green hydrogen economy. Notably, Mr. Dinesh Jagdale, Joint Secretary MNRE, acknowledged this masterclass pivotal role in cultivating interest in green hydrogen, fostering dialogue, and raising awareness among the South Asian stakeholders. During the first session, we talked about introduction, covering topics such as hydrogen implications, demand, significance of green hydrogen, value chain, policy announcements, and National Green Hydrogen Mission. We also had a presentation on the costing and economics of green hydrogen, delving into components of landed GH2, etc. We witnessed a massive participation, close to 250 participants from 19 countries and 145 plus organizations. Part 2, scheduled for will focus on evolving technologies and contracting issues. We also have a third part scheduled for December 12th, will cover risk management and global standards, policies, and regulations. I'll also encourage all the participants to please put down your questions in the Q&A tab being displayed on your screen. We'll take the questions after the technical presentations. Now, without taking much time, let me invite our first speaker, Mr. Aaron Schubert, Deputy Office Director, USAID India, for the welcome remarks. Mr. Schubert covers activity design, localization, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. He previously served as the Director of USAID's Southern Africa Health Office. He also served as the Director of USAID Regional Office of Public Health in Bangkok, the Deputy Director of USAID Pakistan Health Office, and also a Health Development Officer in India. Over to you, Aaron, for the welcome remarks.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and namaste to our esteemed colleagues, distinguished guests and participants from Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and United States, and other parts of the world joining us for the second in the series of Energy Masterclass on Financing Green Hydrogen in South Asia. Before we begin today's session, let me extend my special thanks to all the speakers who conduct this masterclass session on green hydrogen and share their respective expertise and insights. I would also like to thank Joint Secretary Yadav from the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy for joining us today and agreeing to deliver an address. We would like to thank the Joint Secretary and MNRE for their partnership in this masterclass. USAID India, under the Clean Edge Asia Initiative, organizes the masterclass through its South Asia Regional Energy Hub with the focus to provide an in-depth and hands-on training on topics of emerging interest. We started this masterclass on financing green hydrogen on November 28, 2023, with Mr. Dinesh Jagdale, Joint Secretary, MNRE. In his opening address, he described green hydrogen as the most remarkable and exciting future of energy, and I couldn't agree more. Hydrogen, if generated through renewable means, can play a significant role in accelerating the clean energy transition in Asia in all energy and use sectors. It will help fuel transportation, commercial, industrial, and residential applications. Green hydrogen will be the key to enhance energy security in South Asia by diversifying the fuel mix and providing flexibility to balance grids. On the policy front, India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka have launched specific national missions, programs, and demonstration pilots on green hydrogen. India, for example, is increasingly looking towards hydrogen as an alternative source to a fuel to reduce its carbon footprint and meet its growing energy needs. In August 2021, India released its National Hydrogen Mission, which committed to set the stage for India to be a global hub for green hydrogen production and export that energized India's 2070 net zero emission commitment at COP26. We will hear more on India's National Green Hydrogen Mission from Joint Secretary Yadav. There are other developments in the region which I am excited about. Today, as I speak, Bhutan is unveiling its own green hydrogen roadmap at COP28 in Dubai. This masterclass has been developed to complement such developments in the broader South Asian context, to enable the dissemination of information and demystify for the relevant stakeholders in the region. There is huge scope for developing South Asia as a global hub for production, usage, and export of green hydrogen and its derivatives. It will help decarbonize operations across sectors and will be central to the region's energy transition. Green hydrogen presents an opportunity to achieve not only climate goals, but also economic benefits in the form of enhanced GDP, exports, and employment in the region. Collaboration on green hydrogen forms an important component of USAID's work with the government of India and other South Asian countries. USAID, through its South Asia Regional Energy Partnership, or SARA program, has undertaken a high-level assessment of the market potential of green hydrogen in South Asia. This market assessment explained green hydrogen and its multiple value chain segments, along with the associated costs and regulatory challenges. It also presented the market opportunities for these countries and the readiness for the development of green hydrogen. USAID is now partnering with the Indian Railways to demonstrate the use of green hydrogen for trains and power backup. It is also helping Indian Railways to plan the role of green hydrogen in their decarbonization strategy. Working with the NTPC Renewable Energy Limited, SARB conducted detailed techno-economic feasibility for establishing a 50-ton per day green ammonia project for the National Fertilizer Limited Unit in Punjab and a 100-ton per day facility in Uttar Pradesh. This gave great insights into the design challenges for green ammonia projects. SARB also released an in-depth landscape assessment of the investment requirements and considerations for green hydrogen value chain, covering the manufacturing of electrolysis, generation, its transportation, and end use. Capacity strengthening and awareness raising is a key element of USAID's focus on green hydrogen. This masterclass builds on the previous South Asia Energy Masterclass on green hydrogen, as well as a few other specific trainings organized under SORUP. These include training on design of green hydrogen projects and use of green hydrogen in the fertilizer sector. I'm sure this masterclass series will help build a better understanding of financing of green hydrogen. I hope the masterclass is another platform of sharing ideas, case studies, and evidence in the application of hydrogen. I wish all participants the best for today's and the next session, and I would like to thank the organizers of this event, USAID's South Asia Regional Energy Hub, and the Coordination and Communication Platform under SARA. Thank you all. Good night very much.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for your for your warm remarks and insightful address. We're excited to have you with us, and we look forward to having you for many more events, upcoming events. We are also fortunate to have with us today Mr. Ajay Yadav, Joint Secretary MNRE, for the keynote address. As the Joint Secretary, Mr. Yadav is responsible for developing policies and strategies related to development of renewable energy in India, which is a major focus area in the country right now. Mr. Yadav has been involved in the renewable energy sector for over a decade and has been a key player in shaping India's renewable energy policies. Over to you, Yadav sir, for delivering the keynote address. Sir, you are on mute.
Hello.
Yes, we are able
Am
to
I
hear you.
audible?
Yes,
Am I
sir. Yes,
audible?
sir.
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
Yes.
okay. So thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this 3-day conference. And I'm glad to know that so many topics are being covered under this session, 3-day sessions, and starting from the basics of hydrogen to the finance, to the risk management, and to the hydrogen hubs, the storage part, everything. So it's a very comprehensive sessions details. So I'd like to congratulate you, the USAID and SAREP and SARE for organizing this conference. I would also like to welcome all the participants from the region, from South Asia, for this conference. And as you know, it's a the geographical landscape in South Asia is such that eh, almost all the countries here they are dependent on imports of energy to fuel their domestic needs. So, the green hydrogen space is for everyone. Means all the countries they can have. As I was told, Bhutan is unveiling its hydrogen strategy today in at COP. So green hydrogen is expected to play a big role in decarbonization of the globe as a whole, as well as in particular the South Asian region. So as you know, as we decarbonize, so there are two basic pathways where we can decarbonize, we can take these. So first one is you electrify. So whatever applications are there, you electrify those applications, as we are seeing electric vehicles, and it almost every consumer goods are now electrified, whether we use our household goods or everything. So this is one part where we reduce the carbon intensity, carbon emissions, and we decarbonize. Second part is there are certain processes where you cannot use electricity, where the processes they require feedstock as a fuel, as a feedstock. For example, refineries, uh, uh, in fertilizers, in steel. So there you can use electricity to a certain extent, but in the processes you cannot use electricity. So that's where the hydrogen part comes in. So we can use hydrogen in for decarbonization of refinery sector, for steel sector, for road transport, for shipping, and very soon maybe for aviation in form of sustainable aviation fuel. So there are large number of applications that are there for hydrogen, and this number is going to increase. So, keeping this in mind, we India announced this National Green Hydrogen Mission. We launched it in January this year, 4th of January, and we are looking at because we are currently importing a lot of energy, a lot of uh, crude oil to the country. So one way for decarbonization is again use of hydrogen, and since we are blessed with renewable energy, and we have a lot of solar energy, wind energy, so we can use that energy, we can convert into hydrogen, and we can use that hydrogen in our refineries, in our fertilizers, in our steel plants. So that way, a certain part of the dependent on imports get reduced. So we expect that maybe around $8 billion worth of imports we would be able to reduce by cumulatively by 2030. So, under the mission, what we are targeting is 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen production capacity per annum by 2030. and this would require 125 gigawatt of renewable energy. So that's a very, very significant capacity that is being set up in the country. In addition, the kind of the investment that is needed is to the tune of $100 billion. So 8 lakh crore of rupees is that we are targeting. So $100 billion of investment will come into this sector, and this sector will again it will generate around 600,000 of direct jobs. So the number of indirect jobs, it will be much more, but the 600,000 are the direct jobs. Uh, and it will again lead to abatement of 50 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions per annum. Uh, this is a broad picture of our mission, and under the mission we are also because some of the sectors, like I said, refineries, fertilizers, they are ready-made sectors where you don't need the technology is quite an advanced stage. It's a mature technology. We can use hydrogen directly as a feedstock, but there are certain industries where some kind of pilot projects are to be done. So we are targeting use of hydrogen as a pilot for a pilot in steel for production of green steel, in road transportation sector for heavy duty trucks, etc., and then again as a carrier for shipping. So as a shipping fuel. So in shipping, it can be in the form of maybe green methanol or maybe green ammonia. Uh, so we have under our mission, we have targets for using hydrogen as a pilot in these areas. So there are some established areas and there are some new areas which which are the pilot projects. So in fact, if we step slightly back and we look at an overall RE perspective, then our targets are quite significant. We will be have a target of reaching 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030. So this currently we are at around 180 gigawatt, and we hope to triple it by 2030. So, and we have a very dedicated strategy towards that. And this amount of energy will also be electricity and the associated transmission networks. Now, transmission is again a very key component of all this RE setup and hydrogen production of hydrogen and green ammonia. So our targets are 5 million ton, but the response from the industry is very tremendous and encouraging. And we have been informed that currently the projects that are in pipeline at various stages are to the tune of 8 million metric tons of green hydrogen production per annum. So, as is the case with every new product, so there is a cost difference. The cost is slightly higher as compared to the regular, the gray hydrogen. So to bridge down that cost, the mission has incentives for production of hydrogen and for manufacturing of electrolyzers. So we'll be incentivizing the production where there is a trajectory of incentives, decreasing incentives over a period of 3 years for hydrogen and over a period of 5 years for electrolyzers. So this is expected that this will bring down the cost to a certain extent. Then second part is the states will play a major role here. So states are also providing certain kind of incentives. So that will again help in bringing down the cost. So ultimately, basically, it is the cost differential that has to be bridged. And once this is bridged, then hydrogen will like take off in a huge way. And this is for every country. Means we have hydrogen strategies. US has announced its own hydrogen strategies in form of hydrogen hubs. Recently announced setting up of around 7 to 8 hydrogen hubs. And then EU has its own strategy. Japan, Singapore, South Korea, every country in the world is now moving towards hydrogen. In South Asia, what we have in common is our RE potential. So every country in the region has its renewable energy potential, very substantial. Some is in form of solar energy, some in wind energy, some in the hydropower sector. So this is where we can uh, cooperate and help each other and work with each other as to, because 70% of the cost of hydrogen is the cost of renewable energy. So if we have grid connected regions, inter intercountry grids are there, where from where we can source energy. So that creates a win-win situation for the countries involved. And uh, it's very rightly called that hydrogen is the fuel of the future. So as far as financing of hydrogen is concerned, so financing, as I said, there are certain kinds of incentives which every government is providing. But then again, because the kind of risks involved, it's a new sector, fledgling sector, where in fact, in what is green hydrogen is again a topic for debate. Some countries announce the different countries have their own different standards for hydrogen. But I'm happy to convey that in COP today we are signing a declaration of intent on hydrogen, where the different countries they will have mutual certification of their hydrogen standards. So financing, coming back to finance, so it's a crucial component. We need 100 billion, 8 lakh crores, $100 billion of finance for setting up of these uh, plants, green hydrogen production plants and ammonia plants and electrolyzer units. So there are various streams of financing. There's multilateral finance, then there's blended finance, then there's domestic finance. So we have, in fact, because this is a new sector, which not enough clarity maybe now, but maybe 3 4 years down the line, we will have a very solid kind of demand from in every sector. So it is, I think it's some kind of a like where solar was in maybe 2000, early 2000s. So the tariffs, solar tariffs were in the range of 15 rupees, 16 rupees per unit. So now those tariffs have come down to 2 rupees, 3 rupees per unit. So this is what a sector can achieve over a such a means, around 1.5 decades. This is the amount of availability and the cost reduction that has taken place. And similar is the case that I expect with hydrogen. And even the time period may be less, because I think US has announced that this the hydrogen shot, so $1 per in this decade per kg of hydrogen. So that's, so in fact what uh, our targets are also as to how we can reduce the cost of hydrogen, and cost of financing of the projects is a deter is a major factor for determining the cost of hydrogen. So there are two three types of cost. One is the cost of renewable energy, second is the cost of electrolyzers and the land, etc., that is needed. But a differentiator here would be the cost of financing. So we have currently, in fact, in India, we have set up a working group with the industry, with the bankers, with the ministry. So that working group is working on how we can facilitate easy financing, how we can facilitate financing at a lower rate of interest. So that's what we are working on. And I mean, we are currently having a lot of multilateral, bilateral cooperation with the countries in our neighborhood. So I would again, Ms. I'll majorly I would like to close here, but we are always available for whatever queries, questions, and what in whatever way we can learn from each other in the neighborhood, because the geographical conditions, the topography, it's almost the same as far as energy is concerned. So I would again like to thank USAID, Sarah for conducting this workshop, and my best wishes to all the participants and to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay sir. We are deeply honored to have you with us. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your
Thank you so much.
invaluable insights and sharing your in-depth knowledge and experience, and also information on the different aspects of the ongoing project from Government of India in this domain. We are deeply grateful and we look forward to having you for more such events. With this, we now move on to our next presenter for today, Mr. Kiran Kumar Ala from Plug Power. Mr. Kiran Kumar Ala is an energy sector professional with more than 27 years of diverse experience in different capacities. He has a strong background in business development, project management, renewable energy. Currently, he works at Plug Power as Senior Director of Business Development and is responsible for leading the business development team and driving growth in the renewable energy industry. He'll share his expertise on different facets of evolving technologies for green hydrogen today. Over to you, Mr. Kiran.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Um, Thanks for the opportunity for Sarep and USAID for organizing this. Um, as Bhumika already gave my introduction, I'll not waste much time talking about myself. But I'll just mention that my previous experience was in power transmission, then I went to power distribution, then came to the fuel cells and hydrogen. So I'm a very electricity or grid oriented person. So my perspectives will tend to be on that side as well, not so much from the oil and gas perspective. Let me share the deck I kind of prepared for this. Hope you are able to see that now. Yeah. So, yeah,
We can see it.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the high-level agenda. I'll just talk about what plug power is, and then get into these topics of why green hydrogen, what are the technologies, where is the market, dive into storage, transportation, and finally, where does hydrogen sit in the energy system and the end applications. About Plug is a 25-year-old company, US-based company listed on NASDAQ. Um, so Plug has been doing hydrogen since the beginning. So right now, Plug is building a complete end-to-end ecosystem of hydrogen, green hydrogen. So these are the different things that we do. So on the production of green hydrogen, we offer electrolyzers and liquefaction, both equipment and the technology. Similarly, we are building green hydrogen production network in US. So we have a target to reach 500 tons per day by 2025. So we'll be setting up these hydrogen production plants and owning them. On transport and storage, so we have solutions for cryogenic storage and these trailers that would transport liquid hydrogen on road from one location to another location. Similarly, we have these hydrogen fueling stations, 350 bar and 700 bar. We actually do the complete setup of this fueling station in the US. On the end use side, this is where actually Plug story has been building from the last 15 years or so. On the top right corner, you can see the forklift trucks. Typically, these forklift trucks operate on lead acid batteries, but this is a place where we have commercialized hydrogen. So we have replaced those batteries with fuel cells with an inbuilt tank and everything, all the BOP, everything in the same box. So an operator can simply go and refill his hydrogen tank in less than 3 minutes instead of charging the same battery for a long duration. So this is a place where customers have already found a lot of value. Even before green hydrogen became a thing, customers have started using hydrogen, and Plug has been providing hydrogen mobility almost as a service kind of thing. So we do the fuel cells, we do the on-site liquid hydrogen storage, we do regasification, and then set up the hydrogen fueling stations inside the warehouses. So there are more than 60,000 fuel cells operating this kind of forklift trucks right now, and we do more than 50,000 refuelings every day, and we have close to 1 billion hours or more of operating experience using using hydrogen. Other than that, we have a joint venture with Hyvia in Europe, through which we are doing this light commercial vehicles. We are also working in the aviation. You might have seen some airport, airplane visuals running on fuel cell. So it ran on fuel cell on one side and engine on the other side. That fuel cell was supplied by Plug. Similarly, another important area where we are seeing great interest is the stationary fuel cells. So what you see is a containerized 1 megawatt solution. So this is a stationary power, more of offering as a backup power. We have seen very interesting applications on this. So including customers trying to use this hydrogen powered fuel cells to charge electric vehicle batteries. So a lot of people have this notion that, oh, batteries and hydrogen are different, but actually there is a lot of complementarity and collaboration between these two sectors. Yeah, so that's where Plug is, and I work on business development in India. So why green hydrogen? This is an important question that I started asking when I started seeing a lot of interest. I mean, whenever there is interest, people, it can be a hype or it can be some reality. So this is a question I asked, and this is what my personal research says, why green hydrogen is really required. As you all know, hydrogen is nothing new. We knew this in 1766, and the electrolyzer was developed in 1888. So it has been around for a long time. And this is the most abundant chemical structure in the universe, the basic, simplest atom and molecule. And hydrogen is named after its composition. So hydrogen creates water, and when you burn hydrogen, it actually releases only water. So H2O, we all know this. But despite that, hydrogen is not abundantly available in the atmosphere, and that is the reason we don't see usage of hydrogen directly. Currently, hydrogen is used mainly in the industrial sector. Oil refining uses about 1/3 of the total hydrogen today. Ammonia and methanol roughly in the 27% each. Steel production, where direct reduction of iron is involved, about 3%. And 10% is used across many industries, including treating metals, food processing, and many other small applications. Hydrogen can also be used as a fuel for electricity production, in transport, as I've shown you earlier, and also in building heating. But that is right now very limited, but it has a potential to lower global carbon emissions if we use green hydrogen. Okay, so where is the current business case coming from? See, this is 2017 data. This number has grown, not gone down. So this is close to a billion tons now. So if you see hydrogen, green hydrogen, gray hydrogen that is currently being used, it is produced from mostly steam methane reformation of natural gas and a little bit of coal gasification. So the CO2 emissions, if you see in 2017, they were like 830 million tons of CO2 per year. So if you assume that it has grown to 1,000 million tons, it's close to 1 billion tons of CO2 emissions per year. And in terms of the its ranking, if you see after China, US, India, Russia, and Japan, it's higher than many global countries, including a large sector like global shipping. So it's a huge sector, and the advantage with decarbonizing hydrogen is this is a simple technology that can be adapted globally and rapidly. So what you can do in US, you can do in India. What you can do in Europe, you can do in Asia or Australia. So the advantage of decarbonizing gray hydrogen right now is that it can become a global phenomena really quickly. So that's the main advantage of targeting gray hydrogen decarbonization. I mean, obviously, you all know that hydrogen doesn't have any color. Current main source of hydrogen, 95% or more, is the gray hydrogen. It is either comes from, as I said, methane or coal as the input. It has a emission intensity of at least 10 kgs per hour when you use natural gas, and it can go up significantly if you are using coal. Blue hydrogen is another concept. You use the same sources, but you try to capture the carbon. This is one potential opportunity to decarbonize the hydrogen. Other emerging technology is pyrolysis of methane. This is not a very well established technology. It is kind of emerging option. The last and the most interesting one is the renewable energy based electrolysis of water that produces hydrogen. So here, because we are using renewable energy as a feedstock, as input to the electrolysis, the carbon intensity is significantly lower, and that is why we call this as green hydrogen. This is an interesting graph to understand where is the place for green hydrogen. See, on the right side, if you see, this is the share of different energy carriers in the final consumption of energy. And a lot of us would generally assume that electricity is large and growing significantly. But as you can see here, it has grown from slightly below 20% to slightly above 20% in the last 30 years or so. So while electrification is a very important pathway to decarbonization, that itself will not be sufficient, because even if it doubles, there is still 60% of energy pathway that needs to be decarbonized. So there is coal, solid fossil fuel, liquid fossil fuel, and gaseous fuel that still needs to be decarbonized. And that is where the role of green hydrogen comes. This is another way to look at it. This is another graph showing in 2009, 17%, and projected to grow to 2050 to 26% electricity share in the energy carrier, right? And similarly, in various industries, you see there is a different fuel mix. So electricity can decarbonize some industries, but not all industries. So this is where the role of green hydrogen comes. That is where the opportunity really lies. So the dual pathway of electrification along with green hydrogen has the potential to decarbonize the planet fastest. Now, if we think about this is a projection, this is a scenario analysis. Even if you assume a lot of electricity is decarbonized and electrification happens, you can see that in a net zero 1.5 degree scenario for 2050, in the total final energy consumption, you can see 51% share is from electricity. The biomass will increase to 16%. Hydrogen will reach 14%, and 7% others, and a little bit of fossil fuels continue to be in use. So the most critical thing is that hydrogen is right now very, very limited, very nominal, but it has a huge acceleration and huge growth opportunity. As per IEA, the estimated gigawatt capacity of electrolysis is about 550 by 2030. So this is a huge need for growth, and we will see a huge acceleration on the green hydrogen. What are the different production technologies? I mean, is electrolysis the only possible pathway? That was a question I tried to ask. There are various pathways. There is a thermal process, reforming, which is what we are using, gasification, which is what we are using, and pyrolysis, we talked about a little bit. First two are the main sources right now. Pyrolysis is an emerging technology. There are biological processes which use microbes or fungi in fermentation reactions. So you can also extract hydrogen from biogas process, which we very well know. There are thermochemical processes that use heat and chemical cycle in a combination. And then comes the electrolytic process. And finally, the photolytic processes. So among all this, electrolysis is attracting most attention right now and investments, mainly because of, one, its scalability, second, its cost reduction potential, and the maturity of the technology, and finally its complementarity with electricity. So as electricity grows and the cost of electricity comes down, it automatically starts making electrolysis based green hydrogen more and more attractive. So this is something you have to keep in mind. Now, coming to the different types of electrolyzers within the electrolysis, there are, at a high level, there are broadly three electrolyzers: alkaline, PEM, and solid oxide. But there is one more different additional technology that is emerging, which is the anion exchange membrane technology. In all this, water electrolysis is nothing but splitting water using electricity. The chemical reaction roughly remains the same across all technologies. Hydrogen is H2O is broken down into H2 plus half O2. In all these various technologies, voltage always pulls electrons out of anode and through an external circuit and pushes them into the cathode. So the same reaction, same electricity thing happens. Finally, the key difference lies in how these chemicals and materials inside the cell balance the electron flow by passing charge carriers, ions, between the electrodes. So as you can see in alkaline, there is a separator. The reaction is breaking H2O into two lack of electrons and then hydrogen and two OH ions. On the anode side, 2OH will combine with H2O and releases oxygen plus 2 electrons. In proton exchange, here actually this is slightly different. So here the reaction is happening in the anode side. It is dividing H2O into 2H plus and half O2 and 2 electrons. And on the cathode side, this we are actually getting the hydrogen molecule. Solid oxide again does the slightly differently. Here the hydrogen goes in, and at the cathode, you will see that it is getting divided into 2 hydrogen molecules and 2 oxygen negatively charged molecules. And these combine with, these will ultimately release into oxygen plus 4 electrons. Finally, anion exchange actually is a combination between alkaline and proton exchange membrane technology. It tries to copy best of the both worlds. I'll explain why that attempt is being made. It's fundamentally alkaline chemical reaction, exactly the same, but it tries to kind of copy the operating parameters and principles from the proton exchange membrane. If you see the technology readiness, both PEM and alkaline are fairly, market uptake is happening and moving quickly towards the mature situation. Solid oxide is currently in the demonstration mode, slowly entering the market uptake. AEM is kind of moving from large prototypes and going into the demonstration mode. So this is where all the 4 different technologies are. So now let me go a little bit into the different stacks of these technologies. The first one is alkaline electrolyzer. This has been around for a long time. This is, I think, probably the only technology that has been deployed till, if you ask, say, till 2020 in a meaningful scale. So the benefits are, yes, it is the oldest technology and most mature. The stacks are already available in megawatt scale. Because it doesn't use any precious metals, it has a lower capital cost. And what works against alkaline is they operate at a very low current density. Therefore, automatically they need a larger footprint for the same amount of energy handled or hydrogen produced. It actually uses a liquid electrolyte, a corrosive electrolyte, and therefore makes the operating conditions little hazardous. Therefore, you need experts to operate these electrolyzers. It has limited partial load range and limited dynamic response. It uses a liquid electrolyte, so therefore it can't suddenly drop production or rapidly increase production. So therefore it has challenges when it is directly coupled with solar or wind renewable energy sources. It will work fine when it is connected to grid, or you have to deploy a lot of storage to overcome the uncertainty and variability of renewable energy sources. It also has challenges on the lower purity and risk of crossover. Crossover is an important risk because if after you separate hydrogen and oxygen, if they manage to cross over, it can lead to an explosion. So that is one challenge that needs to be overcome in alkaline. So therefore, when you are choosing a stack, you have to be very careful. Lastly, if these are located at a remote location, I mean, the idea is at some point in future, we'll figure out, and after infrastructure is in place, most of the electrolyzers are expected to be co-located with renewable energy at remote locations. And when these are at remote locations, how do you manage repair and operation of these kind of stacks is a challenge expressed by developers, because it's very difficult to take people there or move this equipment. After installation, you don't have equipment to move these kind of stacks, large stacks. So that is one of the concerns expressed by developers. Coming to PEM electrolyzer stack, what you see on screen, in the middle is a PEM electrolyzer 1 megawatt stack. This is a plug powers stack. This is again a mature technology. It has been around for decades. Like the company that Plug acquired, Gainer, was in operation for 30 years. So they have been giving these electrolyzers to submarines, space station, and other laboratory kind of applications. But they were at very small kilowatt scale, not at megawatt scale. Now, the megawatt, as you can see, the megawatt scale stack is already available. And increasingly, other competitors, other PEM manufacturers are also coming up with megawatt and bigger size stacks. It has at least 5 to 6 times current density compared to alkaline. So the stack is extremely compact. It has excellent partial load range and dynamic response because it doesn't use any liquid electrolyte. So there is no liquid inside except water and electricity. So it can actually rapidly ramp up and rapidly ramp down compared to alkaline. Alkaline takes in the range of minutes and PEM takes in the range of seconds. So even in the cold startup, PEM stack will get started less than 5 minutes, while alkaline will take more than 30 minutes. From on a hot standby, this can ramp up from the 30% range to 100% range in less than 30 seconds kind of responsiveness. And it also offers high gas purity. So it is highly suitable to be combined with renewable energy. So therefore, it's the most promising stack technology. What are the concerns? Concerns include there is a concern about that PEM electrolyzers use precious metals. Therefore, there is a concern about the supply. There is a concern about the cost. We'll come to that in the next slide. They definitely cost higher than alkaline right now because they are getting scaled just now. They actually require high purity water compared to alkaline. Um, the stack is very sensitive to any impurities, so therefore this is an additional requirement compared to alkaline. And alkaline, you have an additional requirement of purification of hydrogen. Here you get a purer gas, but you definitely also need to provide the pure water. It can be combined with desalination process because desalination removes any impurities, right? So that is possible. Finally, commercialization is in progress rapidly. A plug itself is deploying hundreds of megawatts of electrolyzer. Currently, we are commissioning a 40 plus 5, 45 megawatt system in Georgia. And that will provide the proof point that megawatt scale PEM can easily be deployed and will provide the performance as promised. So precious metals, this is a slide which will explain that currently the loading of iridium is just about 0.4 kgs per megawatt of electrolyzer. The future requirement will go down for two reasons. One, increase in current density. We already said PEM stacks are 5 to 6 times current dense, but they can actually, we are looking at a doubling of that. So that means the precious metal requirement will go down drastically. Similarly, the amount of the precious metal applied per centimeter square will also decrease because of advanced techniques and because a lot of research is going on in this area. Finally, recycling will reduce demand of precious metal significantly. At least 95% recovery is expected with 10 years stack life. So overall, the initial 10 years will be giving in a lot of precious metals into the stacks, but from that point when acceleration is expected to happen, a lot of recycling will be available and the actual requirement will be lower. So currently, as per a study mentioned on this slide, the precious metals add just about 6 cents per kg of hydrogen, and it is expected to go down to about 1 cent. So while it is a concern, it is not a real concern. That is what I wanted you to take away from this slide. What you see on the screen is the plug electrolyzer stack. As I said, we acquired a company called Gainer, which has 30 years experience, have been working with Department of Defense and NASA. We already set up a gigafactory of PEM stacks, so we can produce more than 100 megawatt per month. And we have a technology roadmap to double the capacity. That means this 1 megawatt stack that you're seeing can become a 2 megawatt stack, and while reducing the precious metal usage by 75% plus. And this we can expect that the megawatt per megawatt stack cost will go down by about 60% in the next 5 years. These are the building blocks. We were supplying 1 megawatt containerized solution till recently, but we have now noticed that customers generally prefer to have a sizable electrolyzer. So the 5 megawatt, 2 tons per day system is the most popular one right now. We are supplying 2 such systems in India. You will definitely see an announcement about commissioning of one of them in the next 2-3 months. The next bigger size that can be used as a building block for 100 megawatt or more is a 10 megawatt array system. Here, the whole system is optimized. The containerized is a plug and play kind of thing. You simply connect to electricity and water, and you can get hydrogen. The array system is optimized for larger scale projects in order to reduce the cost. The third technology is a solid oxide electrolyzer. I have some experience working with solid oxide fuel cells earlier. The good thing about solid oxide is it can operate in reverse mode. The same cell can operate as a fuel cell, but also as an electrolyzer. You just have to reverse the connections. That's the advantage of solid oxide. So the cell construction is the same. So what are the good things? Actually, the solid oxide electrolyzer can use external heat as an input along with electricity. So heat will supplement some of the energy requirements of the chemical reaction, so thereby reducing the electricity required by the electrolyzer. So while both PEM electrolyzer and alkaline electrolyzer use anywhere between 55 units per kg to 58 units per kg or 60 units per kg of hydrogen, the solid oxide can go down into the 40s, 45 to 48 kind of kilowatt hours per kg of hydrogen, and as a supplement some of that energy requirement through heat. It can also produce syngas. There are reactions people are working. It can directly produce syngas instead of hydrogen, which can directly be utilized instead of transporting. It doesn't use any precious metals. It is made of ceramic ceramic cell, and it has paints that are painted as anode and cathode. This is But what were the concerns? It's a high temperature electrolyzer, so therefore it has longer startup times. There are thermal integration challenges. You not only have to provide electricity input, but also as input is required, and both electricity and heat have to work in tandem with each other. So there are some challenges on that side, and there are concerns about life and suitability to fluctuating conditions. If you are coupling them with solar and wind, the variability can create stresses, and therefore impact the life of the electrolyzer. They actually suffer even worse than alkaline from on-off cycling. So they have certain advantages, but they are good in certain applications. So that's at a high level about the technology. I'll move to the green hydrogen leaders at this given point. So you can see there are three distinct buckets here. So we have leaders who are already having a mature technology, who have been shipping electrolyzers, and you will see a lot of news of these electrolyzers getting commissioned in 2024, 2025, like mostly European companies like Siemens, ThyssenKrupp, Nel, ITM, Hydrogenics, and all, but also a lot of Chinese players, Longi, Perec, Shanghai Electric, right, and these kind of companies. And there are multiple solid oxide companies like Bloom, Sunfire, Denso. Plug is one of the top PEM electrolyzer companies. Cummins also has a PEM electrolyzer. Even ITM, every other company which has an alkaline technology is also exploring PEM as a future, because that technology is more suitable to work along with renewable energy. In the startups, we have a India-based startup, Omium, which is a US company, but decided to set up manufacturing in India. So they are doing PEM electrolyzer. Electric hydrogen is again is trying to develop a large stack, again PEM technology. Enopter is an anion exchange technology company. There are few companies which are kind of working in completely new kind of technology as well, next hydrogen or even H-Tech systems. There are alternative hydrogen technologies we discussed, like thermochemical kind of things. So these are some companies. I don't have deep understanding about their technology, but there are some companies which are trying to even do membraneless electrolyzer. I think my only question when it comes to new technologies, are they trying to attempt to optimize or solve only one problem while there are many problems that need to be addressed? So therefore, my sense is that while new technologies will come, but alkaline and PEM will dominate, with solid oxide becoming getting adopted once the industry moves on to hydrogen in order to take advantage of the waste heat. So wherever waste heat is available, I think solid oxide can supplement the installations. But wherever you need cold start or coupling with renewable energy, PEM will take the precedence. And also where space is a constraint, PEM will be an advantage. Alkaline could be certain cases where cost is a major concern, land is not a problem, and you can handle the corrosive electrolyte easily. So there are certain considerations for each of the technology. But all technologies will have a place, and it's important there are multiple technologies that can address multiple challenges. I mean, this is a report by Global Data. As you can see, there is a huge amount of capacities announced. Hydrogen manufacturing capacity, the left side. The middle is the electrolyzer manufacturing capacity. And the right side corner is the EPC providers. So you can see here the middle, this is about, I think, 7.5 gigawatt manufacturing capacity by Siemens, and ThyssenKrupp, Nel, Plug, Hydrogenics. This project say 6 gigawatt each kind of manufacturing capacity. Stage is half of it, about I think 3 gigawatt or so. There is another slide on the same. So this is as per IEA. Global manufacturing has roughly reached about 11 gigawatt per year in 2022. But it is at various stages of development, and it's not just the stack that is required, but rest of the balance of plant, balance of stack are also required. And this is scaling for the first time, this technology, and scaling really rapidly. That is also a reason you see a certain amount of delays in deployment of electrolyzers. As you have seen in the previous slide, many companies are based either in Europe or in China, and they account for about 2/3 of the global manufacturing capacity. By 2030, it is expected that the capacity of electrolyzers could reach about 130 gigawatt. But the key question is a lot of announcements, but how many have moved ahead? Only about 10% have reached a final investment decision as per IEA, and about 25% the location is not specified. So while there is a lot of promise, there is a pipeline is huge. There are concerns, and therefore there are delays in final investment decisions. But I think as we start getting more and more clarity from the governments and more emphasis on decarbonization, I mean, COP28 could also trigger some of these decisions and accelerate the hydrogen electrolyzer manufacturing sector. I mean, these are some parameters that will help us address the electrolyzer cost reduction. I mean, these are some parameters that you need to use even while selecting a particular technology or a particular OEM. What is the energy consumption per kg of hydrogen? So that's an important question. Second is the stack lifetime. Now, if you see, a lot of times when it comes to the equipment, from equipment perspective, stack lifetime seems to be a bigger challenge. Module and stack size is a bigger challenge. But energy consumption per kg is a critical parameter at this given point, given that renewable energy costs are very, very high. However, we need to also keep in mind that renewable energy costs are expected to go down. So while the first parameter is the most important right now, as we move forward, its value and importance will start going down. So therefore, your analysis has to kind of capture what is the value today and what is the value in future. Similarly, stack lifetime is critical, but again, it also the question of what is the cost of the average stack cost, the last one. So the stack lifetime and average stack cost will play with each other. Currently, the PEM electrolyzer stacks that we offer have about 80,000 hours of life. And alkaline also we see similar kind of ranges, about from 40,000 to 60,000 to 80,000 kind of hours of operation. And important thing to remember is that these stacks do not reach zero or anything, or they do not fail after these 80,000 hours. Actually, what happens is they degrade by about 0.1% per 1,000 hours of operation, and therefore would start needing more electricity or energy to produce 1 kg of hydrogen. So they reach a point where it will become uneconomical to continue to put so much of electricity to produce 1 kg of hydrogen. So that is from current standpoint. The other issue also is why are they replaced at the end of 10,000 80,000 hours or 10 years, is that the possibility of failure will increase as they degrade. So these are the two reasons you actually replace the stack, but the balance of plant and balance of system will have longer lives, 20-25 years. So you can simply replace the stack and continue using the same electrolyzer. So this is an important parameter from that perspective. The module and the stack size is critical in the sense that space will become an increasing challenge. Wherever you are doing it on site, the stack size becomes critical because footprint sometimes could be very, very valuable. I was talking to a interested developer who has allocated a X amount of land to do 3.5 megawatt. But when we compared with what a PEM electrolyzer requires of 5 megawatt, we realized that it is only about 1/3 of the total land he has allocated. But it is an expensive industrial area. So for them, it might be advantageous to go with PEM instead of a slightly lower capital cost alkaline electrolyzer. So that becomes an important thing. Operating range is critical. As we said, we already have time matching requirements with renewable energy. Right now, we have a monthly banking allowed both in India, and even the European regulations allow a monthly banking. But going forward, it will become an hourly matching, and then finally it could become a minute by minute matching, and finally the hydrogen producers might be asked to match exactly with the renewable energy production at a minute level, or more refined level. So therefore, it becomes important to have very versatile operating range. So that has a value. Currently, that value is not captured in calculation of levelized cost of hydrogen. But going forward, that could become an important parameter. Similarly, use of scarce materials right now is a concern, but I showed you in one of the slides. Going forward, this will not be a concern. This is, but most of the times you see a lot of media talking a lot about this scarce materials. But I think some of this material is also used in places like spark plugs. And if we are shifting from petrol engines to other engines, and you don't use spark plugs, that will release a lot of supply of these precious metals as well. The startup time is again important when you are combining with renewable energy. So operating range and startup time go hand in hand. And finally, the scale of production is another place where significant cost reduction can happen. So earlier, the stacks were being produced in a manual assembly by hands, but now this is getting automated. So where you are producing 1 megawatt in a week, now you are actually producing 100 megawatt in a month. So that's a significant scale, and this scale will further increase. Automation will also help in reducing defects, errors, and that means less rework and more output, also helping in reducing the cost. I'll also talk a little bit on startup time and operating range. Why it's an important parameter? Because if the startup time is long, you lose electricity that is produced during that startup time. Similarly, if operating range is limited, when the renewable energy is produced below that or outside that operating range, you can't use that. So that also will impact the total cost of hydrogen produced by a particular electrolyzer. So all in all, these are the various parameters one needs to keep in mind while selecting the electrolyzer. And also these are the various parameters on which cost reduction opportunities exist and research is happening. This is another cost curve by IRENA. So right now, the deployment is very, very, very limited. So therefore, the electrolyzer cost is very, very high. But as we start seeing more and more gigawatts of electrolyzer deployment, we would expect that it will start falling dramatically, and then target towards the $150 per kilowatt electrolyzer price target that DOE has set. So these are the two main. Once you cross a 1,000 gigawatt kind of installation, you'll reach a point where it becomes very uneconomical. And then once we say reach our 2050 target, it will be an extremely low cost electrolyzer. Capital cost will not be a concern anymore. This is another way to look at the same thing in a different manner. What is the impact of electricity, and what is the impact of electrolyzer cost? So the two curves here, the top one is based on electricity price at $65 per megawatt hour, about 5 to 6 rupees per kilowatt hour kind of scenario. The top line is the electrolyzer costing about $1,000 per kilowatt. As you can see, it will cost more than $5 per kg of hydrogen. Now, if the electrolyzer cost goes down to $650 per kilowatt, about 35% reduction, the cost can go down to about 4.5. So roughly the electrolyzer is impacting about 50 to 60 cents, or half a dollar to a dollar kind of impact at this electricity prices. And then and this is a cost curve that, this is how, if the cost goes down, the future hydrogen production cost will go down. On the other hand, even if the electrolyzer cost is the same, if the renewable energy cost is just $20 per megawatt hour, say about 2 rupees less than 2 rupees per kilowatt hour, then the green hydrogen cost right now itself will be below $3. And with a lower electrolyzer cost, it will be like below 2.5. That is what will take it directly into the fossil fuel range, and it will be at parity or better than gray hydrogen. and therefore will accelerate adoption of green hydrogen. So as the electrolyzer costs go down, the cost will go down, but at the same time, the renewable energy cost going down is also will have a significant impact on cost of hydrogen produced. So how do we store and how do we transport hydrogen? Because hydrogen is not an easy molecule. It has some very good advantages. It has very good energy density when it comes to weight perspective, but it also has a significant disadvantage when it comes to volumetric energy density. So you need a significant amount of space to store the same amount of energy and transport that kind of energy. So that poses significant challenges at this point, but there are various solutions for it. So these two kind of block diagrams will show you roughly how it will work. So there are two types you can actually store. One is physical, one compressed gas, cryocompressed, and liquid hydrogen. So this is hydrogen in its own form. You convert it into liquid hydrogen carrier or a solid metal hydride or into power fuels or e-fuels or fuels like green ammonia or green methanol. So this is how you can actually store. On the other hand, how do you transport? So on-road, compressed gaseous hydrogen, liquid hydrogen, through pipeline, mainly in the form of compressed gaseous hydrogen. So this is directly hydrogen. And you can ship it. Compressed gaseous hydrogen has been explored. Liquid hydrogen has been explored. The most popular, most seeming to be advantageous at this given point is ammonia form and even liquid organic hydrogen carrier. So these are all the various options to store and transport hydrogen. You can see below that for land transportation, compressed gas is good for short distance, less than 100 kilometers. Liquid hydrogen, the ones that Plug is deploying and Plug is producing liquid hydrogen in US, that is mainly because it is mainly for medium distance transport. So these are transported over 500 kilometers. That is where the liquid hydrogen comes into picture. Pipeline is the ultimate dream for a given geography. For a country like India, if we have hydrogen pipelines, the cost of transporting hydrogen from the place of production to place of consumption will significantly go down. This is where the pipeline is the ultimate solution for on-land transport. Overseas, yeah, you have liquid hydrogen, as I said, liquid ammonia. We'll come to that again. So once you cross the 1,000 kilometers thing, it might be easier to transport it over ships. Yeah, so this is again a summary of what I discussed earlier. I think I'll just want to talk also about the last one, the carbon certification balancing. In initial stages, every sector has its own challenges. If transporting hydrogen is a challenge, one of the ways, an alternative to actual transportation of the molecule is settlement through commercial arrangements. That means just like we have this REC kind of mechanism. So someone can sign a commercial contract and green hydrogen is produced and consumed at the same location, but that will be treated as gray hydrogen, and the green component will be given to the commercial party, which could be on the other side of the continent, and they can treat their fuels as green hydrogen and therefore low carbon. This is one actively under exploration in the aviation market because this is a transcontinental kind of industry. So if someone is flying from America to Asia, obviously the sustainable aviation fuel cannot be available everywhere. So they can actually use this commercial arrangements, commercial settlements in order to adopt green hydrogen and encourage green hydrogen. So the premium will be paid by the customer who is claiming the green component, but the hydrogen is produced and consumed by whoever needs a hydrogen in the same geography. I think in the pipelines, there are a lot of investments that are happening. I think Germany is one country I've seen where there has been a clear commitment to build pipeline. Similarly, the European hydrogen backbone kind of brings 32 operators together in order to establish a pan-European hydrogen infrastructure. Shipping, we have seen initially liquid hydrogen trials, but I think ammonia is gaining traction. Ammonia, the advantage is it can also be used as a fuel. So you have ammonia as the cargo, and you can also use ammonia as the fuel for ships. So that is an area where a lot of ammonia-powered ships, ammonia carriers are getting built. So we definitely can see a lot of ships using ammonia and ammonia carriers both. Liquid hydrogen most likely will be limited to on-land transportation, central production and distribution within a geography, mainly for distributed applications like mobility and backup power. So this is a space we have a lot of experience. Plug has a lot of experience. Compressed gas is mostly used for storage in the mobility application. So that means the tanks in a car or tanks in a fuel cell or a truck will be compressed gaseous hydrogen to store a good amount of volume and achieve a longer range. So this is another way to look at it. So the left side graph shows that till a certain point, both hydrogen pipeline is the most beneficial kind of transportation solution. Once you cross a certain point, the liquid hydrogen could be beneficial, but beyond a certain point, the liquid organic hydrogen carriers could become a useful consideration going in future. And also the important point on this graph is the researchers have considered a very low electricity cost scenario in 2050. So this is not an immediate solution. The immediate solution is what I showed you earlier, but this could be the future where even liquid hydrogen could be shipped across continents once the cost of electricity goes down significantly. On the right side kind of summarizes what we discussed till now on storage and transportation. So you can do compressed hydrogen, that is possible, but there could be very limited adoption. Liquid hydrogen can grow. Again, each of these conversions have a energy tax. So that means you need to spend a little bit more energy to convert that hydrogen that produced from electrolysis into either a liquid or into ammonia or into liquid organic hydrogen carrier and then shipped. Again, when you are converting it back to hydrogen, there will be a small tax. Again, you need a little bit more energy. So therefore, for these to be widely adopted, the cost of electricity going down is again a very important parameter. So till that time, we will see in very customized specific solutions being selected among all these available options for a given use case and in a particular country. Okay, so now I come towards the end. Here I would like to show how hydrogen can play an important role in the future energy systems and what applications we can see there. I mean, before I go into hydrogen, I wanted to take an example of how human civilization has evolved from a predominantly hunting-based society to a farming-based society. If you can think of it, I mean, this hunting thing is very similar to fossil fuels, and agriculture is very similar to renewables and green hydrogen. Why do I say that? See, in the fossil fuel scenario, the energy is already produced and stored and is readily available. All you have to do is go and get it. It is almost very similar to hunting, where you are not doing anything, you're simply going and exploring where you will get the food and then grabbing it and bringing it back and consuming it. So in fossil fuels, you have to find where the fuel is available, go and explore, just simply extract, refine, transport, and use. And another important thing in fossil fuels is their energy density. So a lot of energy, a lot of nutrition is available in hunting. Very similarly, the fossil fuels have a lot more energy density compared to what we are trying to do now. Now, on the agriculture side, here you have to do everything. You start with preparation of the lands, doing the plantation, right, and then giving fertilizers, then tilling, doing everything, and then finally getting the produce and then storing it and transporting it. So here there are additional steps involved in agriculture, but actually agriculture allowed humanity to cross the limitations of hunting, because earlier hunting was limiting the growth of human society, because when it is not available, that means people were it could not support a larger population. So it became a very limiting factor, even though it looks very advantageous. But agriculture initially, imagine the first set of people who started agriculture, they would have been called bigger fools, because why are you wasting all your time when there is so much of uncertainty? Because you don't know whether your plants will grow, you'll get the crop, you don't know how much yield you will get, you have to do so much of work while the hunter is just getting his food and enjoying. But there is a vision in this agriculture and similarly a vision in renewables and green hydrogen. Here, humanity is taking control of everything. So just like hunting has led to extinguishing of so many species, right? Human action and created a scarcity and a problem there. So the usage of fossil fuels has led to a tax on us, which is carbon dioxide especially, which is leading to global warming and impacting the climate and actually challenging human civilization as we know going forward. This year we have seen very high temperatures across the globe, and we have started seeing change in weather patterns, which is a major challenge. I think therefore adopting renewables and green hydrogen in a complementary manner is the solution, very similar to agriculture. I think this is a major leap that humanity has to take. I mean, why hydrogen actually, right? So one of the important things is infinite supply in the form of solar and wind, right? So the solar energy efficiency is increasing, the wind turbine sizes are increasing, so which actually means that we will see we can actually put significant amount of solar and wind. That means it can be converted to hydrogen, so there is an infinite amount of supply and there is no scarcity of water. Yes, there is scarcity of fresh water, but we have significant water supply in the form of seawater, and water cycle is very fast. So you produce hydrogen and then you consume hydrogen, it will convert back to water. So there is no loss of water, it will go back immediately into the cycle. And you can easily transport in large volumes. It has much higher energy density compared to others. I have a slide on that. And you can actually produce clean power and heat at the point of use, apart from many other uses. And you can store it in large quantities for long periods. Right? This is a simple graph showing what are the different technologies you can use to store energy in terms of the quantity and also the duration. As you can see, we have the most popular solution, battery. It can actually store a good amount of into megawatt scale storage and also a daily kind of storage. So that is where it is the most efficient and most effective. But going beyond day, weeks, and seasons, you would need other solutions. Pumped hydro is one very useful solution that can actually act as a very complementary technology to green hydrogen in the initial stage, but it has its own geographical capacity constraints. But that's a very good solution. Compressed air has been a solution, but no one is really exploring it that much. But hydrogen is really promising because you can produce and store hydrogen across seasons, and you can discharge it over a long period of time. So this is a very important thing, because this will support decarbonization and adoption of renewable energy in a big manner. I mean, this is the DOE's illustration, which I personally like a lot, because it doesn't show that hydrogen and electricity are competing or renewables are competing. The grid infrastructure and hydrogen infrastructure are actually complementing each other. They have interconnections. Hydrogen will be produced from electricity, and hydrogen will help produce electricity. This is one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is look at power grid and gas grid as parallel infrastructure that will be in place, and there will be flow from electricity grid to hydrogen, and then from gas grid to electricity. So both of them actually fulfilling the various energy needs. This is again another way to see all electricity sources. You have hydrogen gas and hydrogen based fuels. You store, you transport, and use in various sectors. So this gives us a sense that hydrogen is not just a independent or competing technology with grid, but it is actually very complementary technology with electricity. The last one, this is another graph illustration that I like very much by Irena. Here it clearly shows the production, transformation, transport, and end use. As you can, the production, transformation, and transport we have already seen. The end use sectors you can see here. Industry will be the first one to adopt, not because of any other reason, but because they are already using hydrogen right now. So they don't need to change any infrastructure. They don't need to do any major change. All that is needed to change is the production methodology. That's all. Then comes transportation. Transportation, there are alternative solutions being explored, including EVs. But at the same time, long distance, long duration, long range, the transportation comprises of various kinds of modes, and on all these things, hydrogen can be adopted easily and provide a similar performance to what fossil fuels can provide. I think in last 2 days back, I saw Mr. Honorable Minister Nitin Gadkari unveiling a JCB earth mover, which runs on hydrogen. And the main comment was it actually provides the same capabilities as a fossil fuel powered earth mover. So that is the advantage in transport. Then there is some role in heating and some role in power generation. Power generation is mostly complementary to grid balancing and also to the microgrids, and even to address forest fires. If you are switching off the grid, you can use hydrogen locally and produce electricity. So that way it will act very complementary to electricity, apart from decarbonizing industry and transportation in a big way. Yeah, so that's all I have. I think I saved some time for the Q&A. I'll stop sharing my screen and then we can jump to the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ala, for all the effort you have made for such a detailed presentation and talking about each and every aspect. This was really enriching. We can take some questions in the Q&A from the Q&A tab. I'll read out the questions and you can just choose to answer those. So I have the first question from Mr. Rajan Varshne. He's asking why not use 24/7 firm RE with CSP plus storage at rupees 3 per kilowatt, I mean per hour for making GS2 and 100% CUF to make cost as around rupees 200 per kg.
Yeah, I mean that's what a lot of players are betting. So we will definitely see such kind of arrangements not very far in the future. So I'm sure that will happen.
Okay. So we have another question from Rakesh Kumar. When cost of renewable energy is around 2.5 per kilowatt hour, how the hydrogen cost will be lower to rupees 83 per kg?
Okay, so 83 is like a dollar actually. So my I'll give a very high level thumb rule. A 2 rupees 50 paisa electricity cost will roughly land to $2 50 cents kind of hydrogen price. So for us to achieve a $1 per kg of hydrogen, the electricity cost needs to go down to a dollar 1 rupee per kWh kind of scenario. But there is also the cost reduction that can happen from electrolyzers cost capex going down. So that will also contribute to a certain extent to this.
Okay, so in which of the applications is the use of hydrogen efficient and commercial? That's from Sampad Hota.
I mean, see, hydrogen. So there are specific applications. The application that I have seen is the fuel cells for material handling, where batteries limit the productivity of the operator, because once the battery starts discharging, it starts becoming slow, it picks up slow, and then the operator has to make a trip to the charging station, put the forklift truck in charging, and pick up another forklift truck. So a lot of time is lost. So there is a clear productivity benefit when you use a hydrogen fuel cell in that kind of scenario. So that's the main one of the key applications that we have seen. All other applications, it's the main driver is decarbonization. And hydrogen can provide at par performance with fossil fuels without the limitations of batteries. So all those applications where we want to decarbonize fast, hydrogen will find a commercial application. Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So next question is from CM Jain. What is the trajectory of cost reduction in electrolyzers of different type in the next 3 to 5 years in India?
Yeah, thanks for the question. 3 to 5 years is easy to answer. I can't answer what will happen in 2024. We will, I mean, see, I think India is in a unique position because we have many attributes that China has in terms of manufacturing. And we have started seeing a lot of manufacturing shift from China to India. So that means that is something we can replicate what China is doing in the electrolyzer space. Already Chinese electrolyzers are supposed to be available at half the cost of Western electrolyzers. And if we can replicate some of those manufacturing capabilities in India, we will see a faster cost reduction in India. We can definitely expect all three technologies to see a cost reduction of at least 30% in the next 3 to 5 years, or even more. It totally depends on deployment, and deployment demand depends totally on demand. I think demand and offtake are the key drivers for cost reduction of electrolyzers.
Okay, thank you. The next is, what is the biggest size of electrolyzer which is in working condition and its type with respect to green hydrogen? That's from Manu.
Yeah, so I can give for all three technologies. I think in China there is a 150 megawatt green hydrogen plant operating on alkaline. We have set up a 40 plus 5 megawatt, 45 megawatt PEM electrolyzer system in the US. In the solid oxide, I think there is a 4 megawatt or a 5 megawatt system that is deployed on a demonstration basis. So these are the three large plants you can say.
Okay, Tushar Poddar asks, what is the TRL for solid oxide electrolyzer?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, solid oxide technology is been there around for a long time. The fuel cells and electrolyzers use the same cell, so therefore the cell it is really pretty good. But we are talking about the electrolyzer, so that means the balance of plant, the thermal integration needs to happen. So I think solid oxide is now slowly moving from demonstration stage and to the market uptake stage. So you can say at a TRL level 7 to 8 kind of space.
Okay, Nitin Cherian says, thank you for the in-depth presentation. And could you comment on the comparison of round-trip efficiencies for each electrolyzer technology and the challenges of powering the base load of electrolyzer from intermittent RE sources? How do we plan on ensuring firm RE power to optimize the electrolyzer output?
Yeah, so this is like a moving target. Okay, that there is no firm answer for this, because what will happen is initially the grid can actually support some of the electrolyzer capacities to be deployed on a decentralized basis. So you'll see certain amount of deployment on site by using PPAs of renewable energy. So therefore you are not directly using renewable energy, but you are using grid, and you are doing certain amount of banking. But obviously it has certain disadvantages. People, we would want to move more and more renewable energy component as technology matures and grid becomes and renewable energy becomes cheaper, and hydrogen transportation becomes possible through pipelines. The best thing will be to co-locate electrolyzers with renewable energy, and in that kind of scenario is where you will need to deploy some amount of storage to ensure the uncertainty of renewable energy is handled. So there are two parameters for renewable energy. One is the variability, second is the uncertainty. Variability, we can actually plan, we can forecast, we can be prepared for it. But uncertainty, sudden cloud or sudden wind or stoppage of wind, those kind of things we can't really plan. So for that, some amount of storage might be required. So we will develop those kind of co-located hydrogen production technologies. In fact, Plug has partnered with Life in Europe. So Life has deployed a 1 megawatt electrolyzer in combination with an offshore wind turbine. So they have tested it, the ability of electrolyzer to produce near shore. Then they've taken it inside the sea. They combined it with the turbine, and they tested it now for some time. Now they have expanded the scope to do a 10 megawatt system. So the co-located renewable energy is the final answer, and transportation by pipeline in a gaseous form will be the most stable transportation solution, apart from intercontinental transport in the form of ammonia.
Thank you. So, a couple of more questions we'll take before we move on to the next speaker. Ashish Singla is asking, what defines or determines the quality of hydrogen being produced?
Oh yeah, I mean, see, essentially, in alkaline you use a liquid electrolyte, so there is certain amount of uh, that moisture going into the hydrogen. So therefore, you need a little bit more purification process of hydrogen. In PEM, it is a solid electrolyte, so there is, except water and electricity, there is nothing. But the water also needs to be kind of removed, and if there is any oxygen, that needs to be removed. So essentially, oxygen, water, moisture, so these things need to be removed from the hydrogen. So the electrolyzer technology will decide what is the quality of hydrogen being produced. In terms of the color of hydrogen, it totally depends on the input electricity that we are giving. What is the source? If you are using renewable energy, obviously it will be green hydrogen. If you are using some other form, if you are using grid, completely grid, which is powered either by gas or coal, its energy intensity will be high. You can't call it green hydrogen, even if you use electrolysis. So it kind of both had quality of hydrogen as a material, and the quality of hydrogen in the form of what is its carbon intensity.
Okay, so Saswat Panda is asking a very detailed and a very particular question. So he's saying, you mentioned about minute-to-minute matching of energy demand and supply. Please share your opinions on the 24/7 carbon-free electricity procurement demand from heavy
Yeah,
industries,
yeah, I see the
especially,
question.
yeah,
Let me
yeah,
answer that.
yeah,
I mean,
please.
um, see, I mean, corporate industry is really, really efficient in implementing a particular vision, right? But they are not the best in creating the vision. I mean, that role of creating the vision or what industry should do should be determined by the government and ultimately indirectly by society at large. As customers, whatever we demand, that is what governments will also try to implement because they are our representatives. And whatever government decides the contours under which the corporates have to operate will become the rules and regulations for companies. Now, companies are adopting renewable energy and signing these kind of RE100, right? But they are not determining the technology and other conditions. Therefore, they will try to do the best that they can do within the given constraints. So we can't really hold them fully responsible for minute to minute matching. For example, Google has been exploring how do they power their data centers on a minute to minute matching with renewable energy. So they realize that they cannot overbuy solar and wind and match it automatically. They are trying to do some demand side management of data centers, shifting data traffic from one country to another country depending on renewable energy availability. That is on the demand side. But they're also looking at other technologies, including hydrogen, green hydrogen as on-site production, so that and even geothermal to match with renewable energy and demand directly, right? Um, I know Odisha has been taking some fantastic initiatives. The government has been very, very helpful. Please remember, hydrogen is like a nascent baby, a young baby, and don't expect it to meet all the tough criteria that are not actually applied to the most mature fossil fuels, right? So fossil fuels, we are continuing to use them because we don't have an alternative, right? But when it comes to hydrogen, we seem to be extremely tough on the sector. We need to support the sector to grow, and we need to gain experience and expertise in order to achieve our decarbonization goals. So, Green Hydrogen Hubs is a very good initiative in order to demonstrate and develop capabilities and also build expertise. And I think Orissa, I think, is at the forefront. And I heard many good things from renewable energy developers about the initiatives that Orissa is taking.
Okay, so one last question from Ashish Ranjan we'll take. How do we see South Asian nations responding to the huge water requirements for hydrogen production?
Yeah, I mean, this was the question I too had. So I try to, I try to kind of rationalize myself. I said, oh, there is so much rain falling. Why are we not capturing rain? The answer I found was, okay, there is no value for water right now. So there is zero value. So we are simply throwing away water. We are not storing water. So that actually offers a significant solution. Right now, it is not corporatized. So there is no corporate focus on how do we conserve water. That is one reason we are draining a lot of fresh water into the oceans. That is one. That is one part of the solution. The other part of the solution is desalination. So desalination has its own challenges. There is a cost, but the technical research says the cost is just about less than 10 cents per kg of hydrogen. So cost is not prohibitive, but there are challenges like, okay, desalination also poses certain technical challenges. They need to be overcome when you are trying to desalinize in large quantities. So a combination of saving rainwater, saving fresh water, tools and methods for it is an important tool, along with desalination of seawater. So you will see a lot of electrolyzer plants coming up close to the shoreline in the phase one, and then after the decentralized version, it will be near the coast, and then again maybe co-located with renewable energy. So depending on the challenge we face, you'll see electrolyzer deployment in different locations.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you, Mr. Ala, for your presentation, for answering so many questions and sharing your time and also knowledge with us. We are deeply grateful, and we look forward to having you for other sessions as well and other upcoming events as well. Thank you so much. And it's now, yeah, thank you.
Let me also say thank you to everyone and patiently hearing me. Yeah, there could be, if there are any errors in my slides, I will correct them and share it with you for sharing with others. Do visit our website plugpower.com to understand more about what we are doing and what is happening in the hydrogen space. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ala. Thank you. So with this, we now move on to our next speaker and who is going to shed light on the legal and contractual aspects of financing in the green hydrogen economy. We now welcome Mr. Riaz Bhagat from Trilegal. Riaz is a past partner in the energy and infrastructure practice at Trilegal. Riaz has substantial buy-side and sell-side experience in advising Indian and overseas clients across multiple jurisdictions and in a variety of sectors, with a particular emphasis on renewable energy, electric vehicles, and urban mobility, LNG, and infrastructure PPPs. Riaz has advised clients on high-value project development and M&A deals in this sector. With these achievements and impressive introduction, let me now invite Mr. Riaz for his presentation. Over to you, Riaz.
Hi, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Bhumika, for that introduction. It's a real sort of privilege to be here speaking with all of you on a fascinating set of topics covering the green hydrogen economy. I think these workshops and these webinars are much the need of the hour when it comes to sensitizing the industry and the various stakeholders that we have on certain key sort of topics. I think the presentation by Mr. Kiran Kumar before this was extremely fascinating for me because I'm of course a lawyer, and I come from a very risk-oriented background when looking at and evaluating a transaction. So understanding things from a technical perspective is always extremely helpful. So let me just sort of put up the presentation that I had put together for this, and then we can get going. Okay, so if my presentation is visible, I think
yes,
thanks, Bhumika. So maybe just to set the tone a little bit for this, and of course, before I get going, a huge thank you to the folks at USAID and Sarah for giving us this opportunity. I think when we think about contracting for green hydrogen projects, it is a very important aspect of de-risking these projects to a certain extent, especially when we think about these things from not only an investor's perspective, but obviously also from a lender's perspective. Designing a contracting package that allocates risk appropriately, I would say, and to those who are sort of best placed to bear that risk, I think is quite critical, especially for a nascent technology like the one that we're dealing with. There are plenty of lessons that we can learn, those of us in the industry who have been working both on the renewable energy front over the last decade and a half in India particularly, and as well as in the oil and gas sector, the petrochemical sector, specifically, let's say LNG, for instance. There are many lessons that we can learn from those sectors when we now try and design a set of contracts that could be bankable for green hydrogen projects going forward. The aim of the presentation really, and I thought I'd just set that context up front. There are, of course, there are extremely limited precedents right now in the market for a full suite of contracts that have been entered into for independent commercial green hydrogen projects, right? Yes, we hear examples of massive contracts being entered into for, let's say, the NEOM project in Saudi. There are, of course, various sovereign elements there at play. And it'll be really interesting to see how those contracts and how the lessons learned from such massive projects translate to maybe smaller, more independent commercial scale projects that we might all expect to see being developed in our countries over the next 4 or 5 years, hopefully. So with that being said, I think what I would like to do in this presentation is to take you all through some core contracting principles, right, which we think are relevant for stakeholders to keep in mind, when evaluating, either an investment, financing, or a development opportunity in the green hydrogen space. What we look to do through the course of this presentation is to try and take you all through the entire chain of contracting. We'll start off with, the big ticket items on aspects like their offtake agreements and agreements for key input, that's power predominantly and water as well. And we'll go on then to trying to sort of set the tone for what the entire design and EPC package should look like. What are some of the key things to keep in mind when evaluating an EPC package for a green hydrogen plant? And we'll sort of also round off and end it with talking a little bit about where we think certain legal principles, right, on aspects like dispute resolution, for instance, or cross-border contracting, where we think some of those things may need to be reevaluated to a certain extent when we consider contracts for green hydrogen. So let me just move on. Just very quickly, for those of you who may not be familiar with firm, so Trilegal is a full-service law firm. We're one of India's leading law firms, and we effectively offer legal services across a variety of practice areas. We have over 850 lawyers currently, and as part of the firm and the team that I specifically work in is the Energy and Infrastructure Practice Group. We have a dedicated energy and infrastructure practice group with over 8 partners and over 60 lawyers now. We have been at the forefront of the market, particularly in terms of the renewable energy sector in India. We, in fact, drafted the first set of EPC contracts for a wind power project way back in the early 2000s, and haven't sort of looked back since. One of the reasons we think that we're extremely well placed to advise stakeholders on their potential, interest in the green hydrogen economy is of course the learnings that we've had in India, seeing the renewable economy evolve, seeing how contracts have evolved, seeing how risk apportionment has evolved between various stakeholders. I'm sure many of you who are in the energy and the power sector will have seen the way contracts evolved from the early 2000s to what they are now. We've seen a shift from contractors taking on a large chunk of the risk to now risk being expected to be borne sort of equally by various stakeholders in the sector. And just in terms of that as well, I think the role that we play, of course, is right from conception of an idea of a project to seeing it all the way through to closing. So that's just a little bit of the firm, and of course, I'm happy to connect with any of you if you find the presentation interesting or have any questions. Happy to do the questions, of course, at the end of the session, but feel free to reach out after the session as well if there's anything you'd like to discuss. Right. So I think let's get cracking with the presentation. I think in terms of just setting the context a little bit, this effectively, there are so many stakeholders that are critical in terms of a green hydrogen project. Unlike, let's say, a renewables project, where of course you do have a lot of these concepts and stakeholders prevalent, a lot of the contracts prevalent. One of the key things for the green hydrogen economy and the sector is, of course, the role of the input materials in terms of your renewable energy supply, water supply, and the likes. Of course, when we think of, for instance, if you look at the top right quadrant, government incentives and policy support is something that will play its own very significant role when it comes to contracting and when it comes to setting out project economics. Incentives that are provided, let's say, for manufacturing of the key equipment. India's announced production-linked incentives for electrolyzer manufacturing. These things will translate to sort of various facets of the contracts that we looked at evaluating when looking at a project in different ways. We'll touch upon some of these things in more detail, of course, as we go on. But from a project developer's perspective, from a green hydrogen producer's perspective, I think it's important to note that when designing a contracting package, it's relevant to ensure that risk is effectively flown down. So if that involves, including certain back-to-back mechanisms, which ensures that risks of, let's say, non-performance by your power producer are flowed down to either the off-taker or another entity that is willing to bear that risk, will in many ways de-risk the project for lenders and investors alike. And so therefore, it's critical to evaluate all of the contracts that we're looking at when we sort of envisage a project being interlinked. And they all need to talk to each other in the sense that there shouldn't be a situation where effectively a risk that can be apportioned isn't. If you look at what goes into designing, a bankable EPC package, you of course have your key equipment suppliers, you have your potential other EPC contractors who might be involved in other aspects of the project. You of course have what is really important and what we're seeing these days is the importance of the feed stage of the project. And then, of course, you have your offtake agreements, right? I think that is the elephant in the room when it comes to the green hydrogen sector. How does the market evolve in a way in which there is a reliable sort of source of offtake, and one that allows these projects to be built out at scale for different end users. The previous presentation that we had so helpfully set out what are the various sort of end users that we potentially foresee for green hydrogen. So the offtake market also is, of course, extremely critical. So I think what I'll do to sort of get the ball rolling is I'm just going to get into the offtake agreements. And when talking about the offtake agreements, I think what we want to do first is to try and put out 2-3 alternate structures that the market is talking about, that different countries are evaluating when it comes to off-taking green hydrogen from plants. I think, what you'll see on the slide here are 3 models that we've chosen to discuss here, because each of them has certain unique characteristics. And each of them has different implications when it comes to bankability. So let me sort of actually start off with discussing the first one, which is your sale and purchase contracts, right? Now, by sale and purchase contracts, we effectively mean bilateral contracts for the sale and purchase of green hydrogen. These are contracts that are typically envisaged whereby the input materials that are needed, so power and water, are sourced by the hydrogen producer. The responsibility for arranging that supply and the cost thereof is the responsibility of the hydrogen producer. And that is then, of course, bundled into a service where we generate and supply green hydrogen to the off-taker. Now, these contracts, of course, while I've dealt with it in one bucket, these could have various modalities that could apply, and they could be structured in different ways. You could have, a fixed price firm offtake contract for a long-term period. I think there are various views in the market which seem to suggest that that's what the sector needs and that's what the industry needs, is a steady source of long-term offtake commitments. And of course, from a lender's perspective, that's something that will be extremely critical to see whether these projects can be financed at the scale at which we hope they can be in the years to come. On the other hand, of course, there is, a line of argument to say also that variable offtake contracts with, flexibility on pricing could also be relevant in certain economies and certain countries where, for instance, the cost of your input power is also variable or could be subject to certain escalations or fluctuations. There is potential value to be had when we, try and structure a variable offtake contract. But I mean, effectively, I think a sale and purchase contract is looking to ensure that there is a predictable source of cash flow, right? And that in many ways lends bankability to the structure. It gives various stakeholders comfort in terms of whether or not the projects can achieve the required returns. I think when we sort of discuss a sale and purchase contract, I think it's also important to consider the demand aggregation model, which is another model of offtake here that we would like to sort of discuss. I mean, here effectively we're looking at a potential structure which involves a demand aggregator or an intermediary entity. This could be an entity that is sort of mandated by national policy or by regulations to kind of step in and provide demand aggregation and price aggregation services. In this structure, effectively, the intermediary agency runs auction processes for both the procurement and sale of green hydrogen. I know that Germany has in fact rolled out a program whereby a nationally mandated agency, HINTCO, is responsible for running market auction processes. The structure is quite interesting. I mean, effectively, HINTCO acts as an intermediary agency that runs an auction process and offers 10-year HPAs, hydrogen purchase agreements. The auction process, of course, is aimed at discovering the lowest price for the supply of green hydrogen. And at the same time, HINTCO is also responsible for running an auction process to find buyers to whom this green hydrogen can be onward supplied within the EU. The length of the offtake, the back-to-back sort of hydrogen sale agreements can vary. It can be short-term, it can be long-term. But from a producer's perspective, the contracts are 10-year fixed-term contracts. So, that again lends bankability to the structure. It gives a predictable source of cash flows for all the stakeholders involved. Another sort of important aspect to such a structure could be the fact that it standardizes offtake agreements and risk in the sector, where there is, of course, a lot of potential for varying commercials, varying contractual terms in the initial stages, at least. I mean, in India, we've seen it happen live, with SECI and what SECI has achieved in the renewable space. Evaluating a similar structure for green hydrogen, I think has a lot of merit. These offtake agreements, have varying sort of commercial terms and conditions regarding, of course, both the delivery of gas, take or pay obligations, which I will sort of discuss in a little more detail on the next slide. And of course, it picks up on important aspects such as certification. Certification of the green hydrogen is a critical component of not only the offtake agreement, but also some of your EPC packages and your O&M contracts that you will look to sign, ensuring that the hydrogen that you produce maintains its green credentials is something that's going to be extremely important as we deal with longer-term offtake agreements in particular. In terms of another structure that we can see on the screen here is, of course, a tolling arrangement. Now, a tolling arrangement is obviously different from the other two structures that I've spoken about here. Here, effectively, the key input materials are provided by the offtaker, as opposed to it being the responsibility of the power producer. In this structure, the hydrogen producer effectively owns the electrolyzer and the plant and gets paid a capacity payment, right, for providing the electrolyzer capacity to the offtakers, as well as potentially certain utilization fees when the electrolyzer is actually used to produce green hydrogen. This offtake structure it's quite interesting because it can be bankable in very different ways, right? And primarily because it de-risks, I think, two of the most relevant components of green hydrogen production, which is your input power and water. Now, input power and water in this structure is effectively the responsibility of the offtaker. It could be that this structure is potentially aimed at or attractive to those large industrial offtakers who have, in their view, a steady source of cheap renewable energy power that they can procure, and where they feel that it is probably beneficial for them to source and supply this power rather than require the hydrogen producer to arrange for it themselves. How, I mean, this structure one, which is, I'm sure a lot of us will be aware, was commonly used, particularly in the LNG sector, when we talk of our tolling and regasification agreements that have been signed. So it is sort of still very unusual to see in the market, and there aren't too many examples of this having been done successfully so far. But given the kind of off-takers that hydrogen producers may target, it may be one that takes on significance as the years sort of go by. So, I mean, this was just a broad overview of what are some of the different offtake structures that that we see the market talking about and that we see could, of course, gain prevalence. I think what I will do is now go into I'll just go into, I think, what we think are maybe 5 critical aspects of an offtake agreement that effectively either increases or reduces the risk profile of the entire project. And here, I mean, I want to touch upon pricing, certification methodologies, force majeure and regulatory risk, extremely important, particularly for new technologies. Take or pay obligations, and then that'll round off, with risk allocation and some principles that that would be good to keep in mind when negotiating these contracts. So, of course, pricing, right? Fixed versus variable, a key question that a lot of people will have in their minds when structuring these projects. I think the key aspect here to sort of consider, and for parties to sort of know, of course, is to agree upfront on obviously whether the price will be fixed or variable. But this, in many ways, depends on, I guess, the hydrogen producers' access to a source of fixed, price power, right? So, in a country like India, for instance, where it is quite common to find a corporate PPA for supply of renewable energy at a fixed or a levelized tariff for relatively long terms, 15 to 20 years, if not more. It is, theoretically quite possible to also agree on fixed prices under your offtake agreements, given, of course, that the upfront capex and O&M costs should, in certain ways, also be, should be possible to estimate these aspects. Now, of course, when you talk about fixed pricing in these agreements, it's important to note that while the price is fixed, it's always subject to certain, terms and conditions, particularly on regulatory risk. And we've seen this in the power sector and particularly in the renewable energy sector as well. While you may be able to source a PPA at a fixed tariff for a relatively long term, which ensures that you have visibility on the cost of your power, this is at times subject to change in law risk, right? Power producers are typically reluctant to take on complete change in law risk, and therefore it's quite common to see PPAs that provide for adjustments in tariff where there is, let's say, an adjustment to the grid tariff at which the off-taker would otherwise have been able to source power. Now, of course, that needs to be reevaluated a little bit in the context of power supply to a green hydrogen project, because effectively the hydrogen producer has limited ability to source power directly from the grid if it wants to, of course, retain the green credentials to the hydrogen that it's manufacturing. And therefore, I think it's important for countries to evaluate both the availability and by countries I mean, of course, the stakeholders, to evaluate the availability of power and the cost of that power when, of course, pricing the hydrogen under their offtake agreements. I think an important aspect here also on pricing is whether or not that bundles in storage and transportation costs. We heard in the previous presentation that there are so many different options to consider when dealing with storage and transportation. Each of them have their own sort of commercial implications as well as technical implications, of course. And I think what will be important when we sort of when the industry evolves and when we see different models being implemented is whether or not off-takers are willing to take on some of this risk when it comes to aspects like storage and transportation. It may, it's not unforeseeable that off-takers would like to also maybe provide access to storage and transportation solutions, especially if they think that there is efficiency to be gained from a commercial perspective. And therefore, in potential structures where you have an off-taker that is willing to take on transportation risk or take on storage risk, that definitely leads to an implication on the price under your offtake agreements themselves. Now, when we sort of discuss aspects on certification of green hydrogen, I think it's clear, and as I've sort of mentioned, that having parties agree upfront to the certification methodology is absolutely critical. When we talk about what is, from an offtake agreement perspective, ideal, that effectively is for the parties to agree upfront on what is the certification methodology that will be utilized under the agreement to, determine the green credentials of the hydrogen. Now, I think here effectively it's important for parties to align on this, relatively early on the process, as this could have potential cost implications. As countries sort of evolve their certification protocols, it will be important for parties to provide some flexibility in their agreements to relook at certain aspects as these protocols evolve, as standards and procedures evolve. Here, I think also you're right, there's an important angle, which is the availability of government incentives. For countries that make incentives available for key input equipment such as the electrolyzers, you may find governments mandating certain standards and procedures for the certification of the hydrogen, especially when that's the case, and where these incentives could be made available post contract signing, for instance. The agreement should provide some level of flexibility when it comes to reassessing that certification procedure as well. Now, I think when we talk about the importance of agreeing on this upfront, it's also equally important for parties to keep in mind what are the consequences of the certification procedure failing, or if the hydrogen producer is unable to achieve the certification that's required to maintain the green credentials of the hydrogen. Here, typically from a commercial perspective, you would anticipate that parties will want to negotiate, especially off-takers will want to negotiate, certain aspects with respect to adjustment of price when it comes to any sort of potential breach of certification requirements. But here it's sort of important to evaluate these in sufficient detail, given the agreed certification protocol under your offtake agreement. It's also sort of very relevant, right, to look at cross linkages with your PPA, your power supply agreement here. For example, if the power producer, for instance, fails to supply its minimum, supply obligation under the PPA, the hydrogen producer may be forced to look to procure renewable energy, on a short-term arrangement from an alternate source. Now, whether that alternate source is available and at what cost, of course, will vary from country to country. But to give you an example, let's say from India, the hydrogen producer could theoretically look to the short-term market to procure some energy from the exchange, for instance, the cost of which would definitely be something that needs to be factored into. But the risk flow from the PPA is what is important. So where, let's say, you're negotiating a PPA with an off-taker, I think it would probably be beneficial for hydrogen producers to look to negotiate suitable sort of supply shortfall damages under the PPA. Now, these supply shortfall damages and the way to calculate them will probably need to evolve from what is currently prevalent in the market. And I'll talk about this in a little more detail when we come to the slide on the PPAs and power procurement. But effectively, the question needs to be asked on whether the methodologies for calculating shortfall damages that are currently prevalent in corporate PPAs in the country and in the region hold good for about a PPA that is effectively being entered into for a green hydrogen project, right? Parties will effectively look to maybe peg the way these damages are calculated to not the difference between the PPA tariff and what is otherwise available, what brown power is otherwise available from the grid, but effectively you're looking at forming a methodology to calculate damages basis the difference between your PPA tariff and the cost of RE power that you need to procure on a short-term basis in order to ensure that the green credentials of your hydrogen are maintained. So, these are important sort of cross linkages that need to be in place with the PPA and the offtake agreement. Now, I mean, when we come to force majeure and regulatory risk, right, this isn't something that is unique to a green hydrogen project. We've dealt with these sorts of issues with new technologies, be it solar and wind, which still is a very relevant consideration for those agreements. But I think having a robust and carefully drafted force majeure clause is very, very critical for an offtake agreement. And the reason I say that is that at times, I think that the traditional risk-sharing principle that is otherwise assumed for a force majeure clause may not be entirely adequate. And by that, I effectively mean that traditionally parties, of course, will seem to veer to saying that force majeure is effectively an equal risk to be borne by both parties. And while that may be true for most cases, right, there could potentially be scenarios where the hydrogen producer is effectively setting up a plant to cater to a very specific industrial consumer or a very specific set of industrial consumers located in a particular region. And where that is being done, I think that parties may need to kind of relook at the way force majeure risk is effectively apportioned. Here, it may not be possible, or it may not be feasible, let me say, to simply state in the agreement that each party bears its own sort of risk when it comes to a force majeure event that could potentially impact production of the hydrogen, or which could potentially impact power supply or water supply or any other factors. I think parties may need to evaluate in a situation where the hydrogen facility is being constructed for a specific consumer or a set of consumers. They may need to build in provisions which allow for certain fixed payments to continue to be made to the hydrogen producer, when a force majeure event occurs. And this is simply to, like I said, lend some bankability to those risks, to the arrangement and how to apportion those risks. So this is something, again, it's a way in which we look at the risk, how it's played out in different sectors in the past, and to see whether or not we can learn some lessons from what's happened before. I think similar to force majeure, I think change in law risk as well, right? Given the rapidly evolving regulatory frameworks that we're all dealing with in our respective countries, it's critical for offtake agreements to provide for some flexibility and potential price adjustment or price review provisions when it comes to complying with new regulatory requirements. And these regulatory requirements could effectively impact any part of the chain, right? It effectively could impact your supply and EPC package. It could impact your safety standard requirements. It could impact HSE related requirements that project developers need to comply with, as well, of course, as your hydrogen certification requirements that I was talking about a few minutes ago. So again, I think including certain provisions with respect to allowing potential review of pricing is pretty important for both for change in law risk in particular. I think the next one is take or pay, and again, I think for those of you who are familiar with the commercials and contracts in the oil and gas sector and the petrochemical sector will be very familiar with this concept, and it's one that applies in many ways to the kind of offtake agreements that we're looking at for green hydrogen as well. Very similar to, I think, the oil and gas sector here, effectively, the offtake agreements will need to provide for take-or-pay obligations on the off-taker, in order to lend bankability to these structures, where the quantities of hydrogen produced, of course, are more than what the off-taker can off-take, or where there are defaults in off-taking those quantities. The off-taker is effectively required to continue to make payments for the quantities of hydrogen that were produced. And this is effectively what is referred to as take or pay. So if they're unable to take that quantity, then effectively it's what they are required to pay for. And we will start seeing offtake agreements that build in these concepts in order, like I said, to ensure that there is a steady and predictable source, a cash flow source for the project. At the same time, right, take-or-pay obligations are typically coupled with make-up or recovery rights for the off-taker. And we will see, off-takers negotiating hard on these kinds of rights, because effectively what make-up or recovery rights in a contract allow for is where payments have been made for quantities that haven't been off-taken or consumed. Off-takers are given the option to maybe recover or utilize the services at a later date. Now, this, of course, for a green hydrogen plant will depend on quite a few things, primarily being availability of storage solutions, for instance, or the availability of the hydrogen producer to actually technically and physically provide those services at a later date, and what the implications of that will be under the various other contracts that are signed for production itself. So that's something that's worth considering. I think an important aspect here to also consider is not just take or pay, but I think very similar to what we've seen in certain other sectors is effectively a deemed production concept that parties may need to consider as well, which goes in addition to a take or pay obligation, where here effectively you are looking to provide both parties with a flexible solution when it comes to foreseeable situations where the off-taker is unable to procure the hydrogen. Now, here effectively what happens is that you are looking to include a mechanism in the contract where, let's say, there is a business exigency or a plant shutdown of the off-takers that is due to breakdown of their equipment or certain other commercial considerations, and there is a specific period of time where the off-taker is unable to off-take the hydrogen that's being produced. The contracts may need to provide for an arrangement whereby the off-takers are given the option to issue notices to effectively kind of reschedule their off-take obligations. But that needs to be at the same time balanced with the hydrogen producers, liabilities to its power supplier and water supplier and the like. And therefore, there may be a need to build in sort of deemed production protection under these agreements, where effectively certain quantums of payment for the capacity that is being blocked continue to be made by the off-taker in case it is unable to sort of off-take power. Now, here again, right, off-takers will look to minimize their own risk in these kinds of arrangements, and how they might look to do that is to try and include provisions in your contracts which mandate that the hydrogen producer will attempt in such situations to sell the hydrogen that is produced to a third party, or to find an alternate off-taker in that short term, and to try and maximize whatever revenue is possible from such short-term sale. These contractual mechanisms go towards mitigating the risk a little bit for the off-taker. So they will expect hydrogen producers to do their best to recover revenues for that quantity that they are unable to off-take, and then effectively the payments and damages that are paid are a difference between what is actually realized versus what the hydrogen producer would have been entitled to had this unfortunate set of circumstances not arisen. And these are again things that we expect offtake agreements to provide, and we also expect sort of different hybrid arrangements to come up. A lot of this depends on the structure and what is the requirement of the off-taker versus the reason for the plant being set up in the first place. Is it to cater to a specific off-taker, or a specific set of off-takers in a particular location, like I said, that changes the dynamics of these offtake agreements a fair bit. I think the last sort of point that I would like to make here is generally with respect to risk allocation. And I know that I've mentioned this a few times already, but I think that it's important to kind of reiterate, because I think when we deal with various aspects, including things such as supply commencement timelines, ensuring continuity of supply, insurance, transportation risk, all of these aspects, right, need to be carefully factored into the offtake agreement. The offtake agreement will need to be clear on supply commencement timelines. It will effectively need to be clear on what are the consequences of interruptions to the supply, where we are of course looking to place certain risk on the offtaker when it comes to their inability to offtake when production is possible. I think off-takers at the same time will look to also be protected to a certain extent where hydrogen producers are unable to commence supply in time. Here again, right, there are so many cross linkages to be built in with your key input contracts, with your key equipment supply contracts as well. So, for instance, while the offtake agreement can provide that if there's a delay in commencement of supply, there are certain penalties and consequences. But for a project developer, it's important to sort of pass on these risks where possible to your equipment suppliers or your contractors or your power producer as well, where of course the reason for the delay or the default is attributable to any one of those stakeholders. Here, yes, there is a certain element of risk that remains with the power producer, and the reason I say that is, given the way these markets typically evolve, it's unlikely, in my experience at least, that you will see contractors or key equipment suppliers or even power producers willing to take on complete, back-to-back liability for business interruption risks under your offtake agreements. So liquidated damage provisions are heavily negotiated when it comes to all of these contracts, and we expect that to be the case for green hydrogen offtake agreements as well. So I think we've spoken a little bit about potential offtake structures and the offtake agreements. What I'd like to do now is maybe take a step back, and we've also spoken about references to PPAs and how it's such an important component of the entire contracting chain for a green hydrogen project. I think we all know that there are different structures that could be involved when we talk about procuring renewable power for a green hydrogen facility. Of course, there is the option to have a captive plant that is part of your entire green hydrogen facility, which is sort of co-located with your electrolyzer and the other equipment to ensure a steady and source of renewable power. But there are, of course, also options with respect to sourcing power through what in India is known as open access, effectively third-party supply of renewable power from projects that are not co-located with the hydrogen producing facility. Now, here, of course, the ability to source renewable power through bilateral commercial and corporate contracts, I think depends a lot on whether there is an enabling regulatory framework in the country, in the economy. I think in India, we have seen this regulatory framework evolve quite rapidly, especially for when we talk about private PPAs and corporate PPAs. There have been various sort of measures that have been taken at a policy level and regulatory level to kind of provide and regulate the sector. It's heartening to see the government take concrete steps when it comes to sourcing renewable power for green hydrogen as a part of the national hydrogen mission. There is a strong regulatory environment when it comes to sourcing power through open access. Here, effectively, India has recently enacted regulations which grant general network access to people who have been granted to power producers and consumers who effectively managed to obtain connectivity to the central grid. And this allows for a wider sort of set of options when it comes to your ability to source renewable power as a hydrogen producer. You have more options than you may have had a few years ago. Likewise, the banking facility that's provided, that while that may not be there for many years to come, but the facility that's there currently should help hydrogen producers effectively manage some part of the risk when it comes to, of course, the intermittent nature of renewable power supply versus what they are looking to achieve when it comes to hydrogen production as well. Waiver of certain regulatory charges is only likely to help source RE power. And of course, I mean, while these are sort of aspects that we know are specific to India, I think in other regions as well, where there are certain incentives available for sourcing renewable energy, both in the form of preferential tariffs or in the form of waivers on regulatory charges. I think those factor in very, very, importantly when it comes to your power offtake arrangements. When it comes to the actual PPAs itself, I think what most producers will probably look for, especially in the initial few years of these projects being set up, are longer-term PPAs with some sort of visibility on price. This effectively, of course, needs to be in tune with the offtake agreements and potentially the market of offtakers that are available to the producer, in case a long-term offtake contract isn't readily available. So there could be a preference for a fixed or a levelized tariff for the term of the PPA, especially in countries which see this as the norm in many ways, and where cost of renewables is lower than what it has been for a long time. And this in many ways also ties into how PPA tariffs fluctuate and whether or not they fluctuate. I mentioned this a short while ago when discussing the cross linkages between the offtake agreement and the PPA. Here, effectively, to reiterate the point, where the minimum supply guarantees under the PPA are breached, then there needs to be some sort of a mechanism there for shortfall compensation to be provided to the hydrogen producer. Now, what we peg the shortfall compensation to is likely going to be a mix of a difference between the agreed PPA tariff and what the hydrogen producer is forced to sort of resort to ensure that the hydrogen to ensure that it meets its supply commitments under the offtake agreement. So we're likely to see a mix of these kinds of formulas in these agreements when it comes to determining damages. Now, here, when we, I'll just pause here to also sort of think about this a little bit from the perspective of the power producer. Power producers many a time will look to kind of limit their liability when it comes to supply shortfalls. And given especially that simply linking damages to a difference between the PPA tariff and the grid tariff for brown power may not be an adequate solution for a green hydrogen producer, I think power producers will also look to kind of limit their liability when it comes to the price of power that is procured from, let's say, a short-term arrangement by the hydrogen producer in order to kind of make up for the shortfall. So it'll be really interesting to see how these commercials evolve. Again, these are principles that parties should keep in mind, and that's kind of what I want to sort of bring out here is things that both hydrogen producers, power producers, off-takers, all of these different stakeholders that we have will kind of need to keep in mind when evaluating all of these opportunities. I mean, again, I have some thoughts here on payment security and delaying commencement of supply as well. But these are kind of standard PPA principles that will also apply when looking to source renewable power for green hydrogen projects. And effectively, all of this needs to be factored into, adequately when evaluating these opportunities from a commercial perspective, as well as from a financing perspective when it comes to lending for these projects. I think one point that is important to consider here is curtailment risk and grid unavailability risk. The Honorable Joint Secretary made a very important point on the importance of the transmission network when it comes to ensuring that we build out green hydrogen projects at the scale at which India is looking to do, and at the scale at which many countries in the region are looking to do. Therefore, ensuring that PPAs adequately provide for provisions which acknowledge curtailment issues, which acknowledge issues of grid unavailability instances, I think is relevant. Even from a hydrogen producer's perspective, it's relevant maybe to think of building in protection under your offtake agreements for reasons that are attributable to, let's say, curtailment of power generation, where there are safety issues with the grid, or where there are technical constraints, and where certain backdown instructions have been issued, and the supply of renewable power is interrupted. These are things that may need to also be reflected, like I said, in the offtake agreement. So these are not purely PPA points, but things that people should keep in mind when evaluating an offtake agreement as well. So, I mean, I haven't sort of included a slide on water, but and I think that that's obviously an as critical a component here. And I think Mr. Kiran Kumar said this right, that it's something that everyone knows is so critical and important. But so, of course, having an effective and bankable source of water supply, will require or could potentially require its own contracting arrangements with maybe the municipality, or with maybe a certain other arrangement that you have in place. But that's something that I think we'll see how it evolves, and how project developers are looking to kind of manage that particular input risk as the years to come. So I think I'll spend a little bit of time now, and I won't go into sort of too much detail on the design and EPC angles. I think a lot of the principles that I want to talk about here are, or have been, relevant for many different industries. But I think just a minute or two here on design and contractor selection, right? I think it's very, I say, many green hydrogen projects in the world right now are at what we refer to as the feed stage. And I think for a technology that is nascent, your front-end engineering design takes on, I think, particularly more significance. Feed, of course, is the basic, design engineering that's conducted after a concept or an idea is in place. And comparative feed studies have across the world shown that typically feed accounts for maybe 1 or 2% of the total project cost, but a well-executed feed could save upwards of 25 to 30% on design and execution expenses as the project progresses. Now, what a feed package does is effectively it establishes certain technical and project-specific requirements that developers need to keep in mind. It develops a project strategy when it comes to the plant's design. It provides, of course, a cost estimate for the various input materials and equipment that need to be sourced. And most importantly, it puts in place, a forecast on project execution timelines. Of course, feed is typically split into pre-feed and the actual front-end engineering design, and some of the things listed out here, equipment selection, basic designs and specifications, permitting support, again, an important aspect of the feed process, is something that project developers will need to keep in mind when evaluating these opportunities. I think important to note here is that one thing that feed leads to, of course, is the selection of the actual contractors. And I think, availability of these contractors, assessing who the major equipment suppliers are, all of these aspects, I think, are important to consider. I think when we specifically talk about green hydrogen projects, some challenges to consider, in undertaking feed for green hydrogen, effectively, things like intermittency, the intermittent nature of supply of renewable energy, the selection, of course, of appropriate hydrogen production technology, which technology we want to go for, is it alkaline, PEM, etc. Feed and wastewater management, of course, very critical aspect of ensuring that the project is designed properly. Hydrogen storage, of course, being an important aspect as well. And of course, assessing what, if any, are supply chain side limitations in the entire process. Feed studies typically also help ensuring that potential environmental and HSE related risks are flagged upfront, and that project developers are given the option to kind of factor those in correctly when executing the contracts for these projects. When it comes to EPC contracts, right, I think it's important to kind of highlight upfront that there are different structures that are potentially possible. We saw this in the renewable energy industry, where many years ago, turnkey EPC structures were quite common, especially offered by large-scale OEMs in the wind industry, for instance. And we saw that structure moving as the technology matured and as the sector matured. We saw projects and project developers moving away from a turnkey, EPC wrap structure, where effectively you have one or a very limited set of contractors who have single point responsibility for delivering the project within the agreed budget and agreed timelines. We saw the industry moving away from that to what we see now, which is a multi-contract structure, or a split contract structure, as we like to call it, where not only are the contracts split for commercial reasons, but effectively you have different contractors who perform their specialist roles. We've seen OEMs take a step back from the service-related roles and want to limit their sort of involvement in projects to supply-side issues and effectively manufacturing and supply of the key equipment. So in terms of evaluating these structures for a green hydrogen project, I think it's going to be really important to see how the market evolves. I think today there are quite a few turnkey solution providers who are looking at not only supplying the key equipment, the electrolyzers, but also providing installation and commissioning services, for instance. And that is something, and the availability of these turnkey service providers is, I think, going to be crucial, because this might vary from market to market and economy to economy. Different countries might have different sort of unique characteristics which might lend itself to one of these two particular structures. I think the obvious point to make here is that when you have a turnkey EPC solution, there is less interface risk for the project developer to take on, right? It is effectively development is de-risked to a certain extent, because you have one contractor who assumes single point responsibility for delivering the project at a particular cost and within the agreed timelines. When it comes to a split contract structure, of course, there is a certain degree of increase in the interface risk that now sits with the hydrogen producer. So how do you mitigate this risk? I think it's important, of course, to ensure that there is a thorough EPC management process that's put in place. All sort of program and project delivery schedules, completion milestones, progress reporting, these aspects need to be coordinated across the various contracts that you have in the chain. And there needs to effectively be a proper procedure for coordination between the various contractors that are engaged. So there has to be, a robust information sharing protocol between the various contractors. There needs to be coordination protocols between the various contractors, and the contracts need to provide for these aspects clearly, so as to reduce the interface risk to the extent possible at the project owner's level. Now, while there are sort of different contracting structures, and that lends itself to the level of interface risk that the project owner needs to bear, I think there are certain aspects of core sort of EPC principles that assume a lot of significance when it comes to a green hydrogen facility. Now, I think I spoke a little bit about aligning program schedules and delivery schedules. I think maintaining control over the schedule and having provisions under your contracts which ensure that hydrogen producers can effectively maintain control over the schedule are very important. By this, effectively, I mean that the contract typically needs to provide for detailed acceleration rights or step-in rights for the project owner to ensure that where things are lagging behind and where things are falling behind, there is some mechanism in the agreements that are in place to kind of effectively cater to these situations. Now, when it comes to aspects like performance guarantees or testing and commissioning, we obviously need to keep in mind the technology that we're talking about here. I think in India, the MNRE has specified certain, guaranteed certain standards or with respect to the guaranteed life of an electrolyzer, and other countries might also sort of, follow suit and set out certain guiding principles that the industry needs to follow. But effectively, the point is that whatever the performance guarantees are agreed between your key equipment suppliers and the project owners, the agreement needs to specify, I think quite importantly, what are the consequences for failing to meet these guarantees. There will, of course, be conversations and negotiations to be had on liability caps and things of that sort, but this effectively also needs to tie in then to the offtake agreement with what are the consequences of the hydrogen producer failing to achieve its supply obligations under the offtake agreements. I think when it comes to aspects like insurance, I think there are lessons to be learned from what the insurance market has traditionally in place for hydrogen. I mean, of course, hydrogen isn't a new commodity that is unknown. It's well known and well understood in terms of the risks that it has, from the perspective of fire risk or safety risk when it comes to leakages. Those aspects are well understood. So I think when it comes to covering for short-term risk, insurance during construction, I mean, these are, your typical contractors all risk insurance or delay in startup insurance. So the availability of these insurance products will also go a fair way in mitigating some of the construction risk in these projects. I don't see why some of the insurance products which are already available shouldn't really, be useful for green hydrogen EPC arrangements. I think that that's a good argument to be made for these insurance products to be equally applicable to the green hydrogen plants that we're looking to build out. When it comes to aspects like testing and commissioning, I think contracts need to be clear on what are the tests that need to be performed to ensure that plant is functioning as per spec. These might include things like your hydrogen purity tests or leakage tests to determine whether or not the equipment is functioning as per spec. It might also, of course, include tests on various other aspects of the plant and not just the electrolyzer, right? On the compressors, on the drying plant, on various aspects. So for the agreements to provide very clearly on what these tests are, on what the schedule is for conducting these tests, and what the procedure is for commissioning, I think will be very important. I think just one more point on the slide before we move on. And I'm mindful that we're running a little short on time because I want to save some time at the end as well. Negotiating risk purchase provisions in these contracts, right? Effectively, we are considering and talking about a situation where it is a new technology for many countries. You're looking at scaling electrolyzer supply. You're looking at effectively building out larger scale projects, which hasn't been done before. So therefore, parties need to keep in mind that where things go south, there are certain contractual mechanisms for hydrogen producers to kind of fall back on and to kind of look at when it comes to maybe replacing a contractor who has defaulted. The traditional risk purchase provisions in an agreement would allow the project owner to effectively, in case of a termination for a contractor default, look to bring on a new entity in place who effectively takes on the role of completing the project as per the agreed specifications. Now here, the cost of or the incremental cost that is incurred by the project owner in bringing on this new entity, a certain part of that would be prudent to negotiate that a certain part of that is shared with the defaulting contractor. Of course, that being said, contractors and suppliers will it's unlikely that they will take on complete liability for these aspects, because they will also look to limit their liability in most cases. But negotiating a commercially reasonable cap on these liabilities is something that has happened in various other sectors, and something that we think will be quite important to keep in mind when sort of designing EPC packages for green hydrogen plants as well. So I think if we move on, operations and maintenance, right? Again, having a detailed O&M contract for operations and maintenance related obligations is something that will need to be considered by all parties, and this particularly has implications on your offtake agreements. We've seen it in the power sector, we've seen it in the oil and gas sector as well. There are lessons to be learned on how we devise O&M strategies that will ensure that offtake commitments and risk under your offtake agreements are shared with the O&M contractor, and this will effectively form the basis of your availability guarantees for the plant. It will form the basis of your annual certification protocols for both not just purity of the hydrogen as well, but the green credentials, which we've spoken about in the past. Now, the O&M scope, right, for a green hydrogen plant would include various things. I mean, it could include not just the electrolyzer, but the compressors, the vacuum pumps, the dryers, different components. So effectively ensuring that the scope of the O&M services that are to be provided are clearly detailed in the agreement is critical. As it is with most other large-scale infrastructure projects, particularly in the energy space. Given the nature of these projects, I think Mr. Kiran Kumar mentioned in his presentation as well earlier that where we are looking at co-locating green hydrogen facilities with renewable plants, which may be in remote areas or which may be difficult to access, the ability of your engineers and your technicians to access those sites to perform, preventive maintenance or corrective maintenance, or even your scheduled maintenance activities becomes important, and that those are risks that need to be factored into when designing the O&M agreement. Trying to ensure that the time it takes for your contractor to actually get to the site to be able to perform this maintenance activity isn't one which is severely impacting your production capabilities, and therefore severely increasing your liability under your offtake agreements. I think where we are talking about plants where hydrogen is to be converted into more stable forms such as ammonia, etc., your O&M contracts will need to provide for safety and emergency response procedures, right? These are things that need to be taken care of in the drafting of these agreements. These are things that parties need to keep in mind when designing obligations, and therefore, it's important for I mentioned earlier as well on HSE compliance. It's important for your O&M contracts to contain an agreed set of HSE protocols in terms of what happens in case of an emergency, what happens in case of a gas leak, or certain other sort of circumstances which could pose a risk to health and safety of people at site. I think when we sort of talk about different kinds of responsibilities of an O&M contractor, I think it's important to note that as the regulatory framework evolves, as the certification framework evolves for certifying safety of these plants, contractors are responsible for kind of liaising with authorities when it comes to statutory inspections and regulatory compliances. Where it comes to even having obtained certain incentives from government policies, they might mandate certain inspection requirements by their own engineers or by their own agencies. So it needs to be clear in the agreement that contractors work with the project owner and they work with these authorities to ensure that these inspections are undertaken in time. So certification is something that we've spoken about a little bit, and there are of course different standards now in the world when it comes to what is the certification that needs to be used and agreed for green hydrogen plants. There are of course private agencies that provide certain certifications, the likes of TUV and Certify and the like, and of course that there will be national level mandates that are provided. in terms of certification. It's very important, as I've mentioned previously, for the parties to agree upfront, and for there to be, clarity on what is the certification protocol that is to be followed. If the parties are going with an independent third-party certification protocol, it needs to be assessed whether that sits in line with, what is otherwise nationally mandated by the law, or what is otherwise provided for in the regulatory framework. The MNRE, for instance, in India has, I think a lot of you must be aware, has kind of designated the Bureau of Energy Efficiency as being the nodal agency for certification of, green hydrogen facilities in India. Now, that accreditation process will, of course, evolve over the years to come, and that certification process will evolve. So when these contracts are entered into, I think the point here is that the parties need to be clear upfront on which certification methodology is proposed to be used, where that certification happens. Does it happen at the production system boundary, or does it happen at the delivery and offtake system boundary? TUV, for instance, has what is known as the Green Hydrogen Plus certification, where they take into account not just the carbon emissions at the production stage, but also right up until delivery and offtake. So taking into account, of course, carbon emissions in transport and various sort of factors. So, that's an important aspect that needs to be addressed suitably in the offtake agreement, and it also needs to be reflected then not only in your O&M contracts, but also in your EPC package as well. Storage and transport. So on storage and transport, I won't sort of go into too much of the technical detail here because that's been covered in the previous slides. But effectively, I think what we can consider when talking about storage, for instance, is a potential tolling agreement, right, or a tolling arrangement where you have a third-party service provider, or the storage facility is something that is kind of co-located with the plant itself, and there is an additional charge that's provided for providing that service to your off-takers. Now, when sort of considering what is relevant for storage facilities from a contracting perspective, I think it's important for parties to include measures with respect to ensure that the storage facilities are, of course, built to the agreed safety specifications and standards, and that there are sufficient mechanisms in the contract to provide for, let's say, variation types of instances where the certification and where the safety standards, for instance, evolve. So there needs to be some kind of mechanism in the agreements which allow for parties to maybe revisit the storage infrastructure that's been put in place if there is a change in the regulatory framework. And of course, there may be other sort of agreements and sort of other sort of considerations that need to go in when talking about how storage works for green hydrogen facilities, particularly in a tolling agreement, in a tolling construct. Now, of course, similar to what we discussed earlier on the offtake, when we talk about a tolling construct for storage, we're talking about effectively fixed capacity payments being made for reserving a certain capacity of the storage tanks, where, of course, tanks are being used. And then there is a variable component to that when referring to sort of payments for actual utilization of the storage capacity. An important aspect to consider here is insurance again. So insurance is not only relevant, of course, from a construction of the facility perspective, but also in your storage agreements that you might look to execute. Does the insurance protect against risk of loss where there has actually been no transfer of title? A lot of storage agreements in other sectors, of course, if we look at LNG, for instance, there is no actual transfer of title that happens in the gas that's produced. The entity that is providing storage services is effectively just taking on the risk of the gas once it is sort of delivered to the storage facility, but there is no actual transfer of title. Now, how does that play out in terms of the insurance-related provisions that we have in these agreements is something that's quite important to consider. So I think I'm running a little short of time, so I'll move on a little quickly. When it comes to transportation, I think from a contracting perspective, transportation by trucks is something that, of course, is an option that's there, and there are things to keep in mind when it comes to ensuring that the contracts contain proper provisions on the transfer of risk and title to the service provider. It contains proper provisions on delivery and redelivery of gas. Effectively, what are the points at which both these occur, and of course the commercial arrangements itself. But I'd like to take a minute to talk about some potential contracting structures that we might be seeing in the future when it comes to pipelines, and something that we can learn from the petrochemicals and the oil and gas space. So obviously the question is using dedicated pipelines versus utilizing an existing network. While there are, of course, limitations for hydrogen when it comes to utilizing an existing network, when we talk about dedicated pipelines, it's likely that these may be considered where the hydrogen producing facility is located near to the off-takers' facilities. Now here, I think the question to be asked is when dealing with a hydrogen plant that is in close proximity to an industrial cluster with potential off-takers, whose responsibility is it to lay the dedicated pipeline? It could be possible that off-takers are willing to take on this responsibility and the associated capex for laying the dedicated pipeline. And where this situation arises, there may be a need to kind of enter into service agreements with the hydrogen producer to ensure that the hydrogen producer takes the responsibility for operating and maintaining the pipeline. There are situations where you may need to consider an arrangement whereby the pipeline is owned by the off-taker. But like I said, O&M services for the pipeline is not something that the off-taker wants to provide, so he contracts that out to a different entity. And effectively, that has a whole bunch of ramifications in terms of transfer of risk, in terms of apportioning exclusions to your offtake commitments where the pipeline has a defect and things of that sort. There could also be a situation where the pipeline is, of course, paid for and built by the project owner themselves, and where that pipeline is sought to service multiple off-takers located within a particular industrial cluster. You may need to consider things like fixed capacity payments for the commercial arrangement, and again, aspects on insurance, safety, O&M, all of those things take on significance when considering these aspects. When you talk about utilizing an existing pipeline network, I think one thing that we need to keep in mind is that where and if this becomes prevalent, there are certain pilot projects in India now where we're talking about blended hydrogen, but where this becomes prevalent in the future, I think one thing that from a contracting perspective we may need to live with is the fact that the contracting standards will largely be set by the network operator or the network owner, and these will be sort of standard terms and conditions that will apply in most cases to any person who is utilizing the network. So I think what I'll do is I'll pause over here, Bhumika. There were a couple of slides, going ahead on dispute resolution and some cross-border contracting principles, which I think are pretty self-explanatory. And when we share the presentation with the attendees and with the participants, I think that they should be able to gain some insights from what we want to say on these. So maybe I'll pause for now and see if there are any questions that we can take on.
Hello, Riaz.
Hi, Bhumika.
Yeah, hello. It is stagnant. Is it, are you moving the PPTs?
No, were you able to hear? I was just saying that I will pause for now. There were two slides that were sort of left, but I think given the fact that we're running a little short on time,
Yeah.
the slides are mostly kind of self-explanatory. So if they should be useful to anyone who kind of reads them and will make the presentation available, I think that will kind of help if people can take a look at that.
Sure. So that's fine. I think so. Another 5 minutes. People can go through the slides, and also we have a couple of questions. In case any other questions the audience wants to ask, they should just put it in the Q&A tab. We'll wait for a bit, and then we'll go ahead with the question answer session.
Okay, sure. So maybe then I'll just quickly take us through, these the slides that the 2 slides that are there.
Okay.
I think when it comes to dispute resolution, it's important for parties to evaluate mechanisms in these contracts which maybe deviate from what is standard. We're all, I think, in the industry and in other industries used to seeing arbitration clauses or used to seeing other dispute resolution clauses. But I think the nature of contractual disputes that are possible when it comes to green hydrogen facilities and plants are such that we may need to think of certain alternative mechanisms. And by that, I effectively mean that there is potential, right, for there to be multiple recurring disputes, especially when it comes to things like daily, weekly, or monthly reconciliation of supply commitments, offtake commitments, liabilities for things like unavailability of pipeline infrastructure or unavailability of supply of renewable power. So there are sort of various aspects of the entire contractual framework that could lead to contractual disputes. And here, I think, in those situations, simply resorting to arbitration is probably not the best way to deal with these things. Again, there are various lessons to be learned from other sectors on what can and cannot work. But we think that the lack of technical intervention at the right time and the lack of proper conciliation mechanisms in dispute resolution mechanisms that are otherwise found in these contracts is something that could be looked at, and we can look to improve these aspects when we contract for these projects. Effectively, I think what we will look to do is to bring in multi-tiered dispute resolution mechanisms where there is mandatory conciliation or there is mandatory reference to a technical expert to ensure that your run-of-the-mill daily sort of claims and counterclaims and disagreements and disputes on those are effectively managed, and that not everything needs to be resorted to an arbitral tribunal, which of course has cost and time implications, and that leads to a cycle of parties being unable to resolve these disputes, and that of course has negative impacts on cash flow. From a government and policy perspective, right, I think it's also maybe important to consider the need for a nationally mandated conciliation authority. In the absence of a specific regulator for the sector, I think coming up with some sort of forums or committees where conciliation is referred to could really improve aspects when it comes to preventing your more run-of-the-mill commercial disputes from going to arbitration, and therefore the lengthy process that takes. So that's something for I think countries and governments to think about on whether conciliation forums and conciliation committees are useful in these situations. What we've seen from other sectors, of course, is that they are quite useful, and they can seriously reduce the number of disputes that actually go into arbitration. I think when we deal with cross-border contracting, right, especially when considering things such as export green hydrogen potentially to off-takers outside, these are certain contracting principles that everyone should keep in mind. And these, again, aren't unique to a green hydrogen plant, but just something that I thought I'll leave with everyone in terms of what should be at the forefront of parties' minds when evaluating cross-border contracts. Choice of applicable law, of course, is an obvious one. Here, we think that the way the market will evolve is that the preference will typically lie with the hydrogen producers. But again, seeing how these contracts have evolved in different sectors in India, it's not at all uncommon for there to be a neutral, the applicable law of a neutral country to apply to these contracts. Again, when it comes to transfer of risk and transfer of title to the goods, selecting the right Incoterm becomes very important when it comes to determining whose responsibility it is to manufacture, whose responsibility it is for insurance, for transportation, and various aspects. Again, currency considerations when a cross-border contract is entered into will effectively result from what is the currency of payment that parties are looking to agree on, whether there is some forex risk that needs to be factored into these aspects. Typically, I think you will look at producers again having a slight maybe upper hand in terms of negotiating these clauses in these agreements. But again, a lot of that will depend on the offtake market that exists for exports. I think dispute resolution mechanisms is something that I've touched upon, and that will, of course, always be important in a cross-border contract, coming up with the right set of arbitration rules that govern disputes and proper procedure for appointment of your arbitrators and the like will always be relevant to these agreements. So yes, that brings me to the end of the presentation. I think I've just about exhausted the time that was allotted, but yes, happy to sort of take any questions that we've got.
Yeah, thank you, Riaz, for your presentation. I think we have a couple of questions. And so I'll just read the questions for you so that you could answer. Yeah. Okay, so Nitin Cherian, he's asking India is also looking to become a major exporting hub of GH2 in addition to manufacturing capacities. The certification standards of GH2 vary for regions and countries. How can offtake agreements, particularly for certification of GH2, address the variability of standards with different international offtakers?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it goes to the heart of the point that I was making earlier in terms of your offtake agreements providing for adequate pricing review mechanisms in case there is a change in the certification standards that apply to a particular international offtaker. I think firstly agreeing upfront on the applicable certification standards will be critical. This again, you're right in stating that there could be different certification standards that apply to different off-takers. So providing for that in your contracting chain, where to the extent possible, is very important. And we'll have to see how project developers take on this risk. But the offtake agreements, when we consider the offtake agreements, effectively we are looking at providing some flexibility for the parties to relook at certain provisions in case there is changes to your certification standards, even from country to country.
Okay, so there's another question from Ruchita Shah. Can one go for purchasing RECs and continue to buy brown grid power at grid tariff and still on paper claim to produce green H2?
So again, a good question, and currently this will all depend on the certification protocol that the countries bring out. Including India, for instance, we need to see what the Bureau of Energy Efficiency comes out with in terms of what exactly we claim to be a green hydrogen, both in terms of production as well as offtake. There is, of course, an argument to be made that being able to purchase RECs and continue to buy, brown power should give you the benefit of claiming that the power that you have procured is green. But for instance, there are certification standards in the EU which mandate the rule of proximity. So, or to mandate the rule of effectively, there has to be a temporal correlation between the plant, the renewable energy facility that has been set up, and the hydrogen for which you're claiming those credentials. So if, for instance, those standards were to apply, effectively you're talking about the need. You're talking about a need for new renewable capacity to come up to service new green hydrogen production facilities. These things will kind of evolve. But yes, I think my initial thought process on this is that there should be a strong case to argue to, especially to aid the REC market as well, that should be possible. But we'll have to wait and see what the government thinks on this.
Thanks, Riaz. And we have the last question for today from Sampad Hota. In case a developer wants to sell H2 on merchant basis, what risks should be covered in contracts, insurance, price variation guarantees, if any? and which type of offtake agreement will be applicable?
Yeah, so when you are looking at sale of hydrogen on a merchant basis, like so currently, for instance, there are no real spot prices for green hydrogen, right? And a lot of it will depend on the off-taker and what the end use is. But effectively, I think it's important for hydrogen producers to keep in mind certain sort of certain key aspects when looking at sale of hydrogen on a merchant basis. When it comes to price variation, for instance, right? I think it's important to note that a lot of this will depend on the price of your input supply. If hydrogen producers have been able to source fixed supply of power, sorry, a fixed tariff for their renewable supply, it's likely that there will be more flexibility in terms of pricing for and pricing variations for merchant sale, insurance as well, right? I mean, effectively, there are typical use cases for determining that insurance is at the merchant off-taker's risk, because it is effectively a price taker market that you're potentially considering. When dealing with a merchant contract, I think it's useful to consider your sale and purchase agreement, offtake agreement, as probably one that will need to be modified for those types of arrangements, because you're unless you have a nationally mandated sort of intermediary agency who is mandated to collect offers versus supply offers versus buy offers in a sort of in a market type of situation that we're seeing now with power, for instance, on the power exchanges. So if that's the sort of arrangement that we come up with, then that will also have an impact on those hydrogen producers who are looking to sell on a merchant basis. But again, this is an aspect that I'd love to sort of fast forward 2 or 3 years down the line to see how the market evolves.
Okay, thank you so much, Riaz, for all your insights and expertise. This has been truly an enriching experience. And thank you for answering all the questions as well. I am sure the audience has benefited. So with this, we have now reached to the last segment for today. That is the vote of thanks or the concluding remarks. For this, I invite Mr. Mayank Bhardwaj, who's from the SAREP team. Mayank is an energy infrastructure expert with more than 16 years of experience in financial appraisal, transaction advisory, PPP, and mobilizing investments. Right now, he is the objective lead for mobilizing investments objective at SAREP. Over to you, Mayank.
Sure, thank you. So I think both the sessions were extremely enriching. I've run out of pages on my notepad, during note taking. So I think it was really very enriching for me. First of all, as a vote of thanks, I would like to thank the GS Shri Adi Yadavji for sparing time to come over and give the keynote address. The MNRE team at the back end from his office that supported us and coordinated the entire thing from the MNRE. USAID, Aaron for his remarks, the welcome address, Apurva and Monali. Then the speakers, Kiran and Riaz, particularly, Kiran, especially the slide when he mentioned about the fossil fuels versus RE and the piece on hydrogen. I think that was something very, very unique per se, I would say. And Riaz, I think the point which you made about the contracting structures at least gave us some bit of an idea that what sort of contracts can actually be implemented for green hydrogen from an offtake perspective. So I think these two possibly were the highlights. I'm mindful of the time, so I'll not really try and summarize some of the things which were said. So thanks, Riaz and Kiran, for this, for sharing your insights and your expertise through these sessions. And in SAREP, the team of led by Rakesh ji, Mr. Rakesh Goel, Namrata, and Farah, Bhumika, and the workstream one for for their support on the communication side, and lastly Vivek for his just putting it all together. I think that has been an incredible effort to do this. And lastly, the participants. I think thanks a lot for sparing almost 3 hours of your time, giving us 3 hours of your time to listen patiently to this entire masterclass.
And just just in last, I would just state, which Ajay Adavji actually mentioned, that the key differentiator, as per him, is financing in the green hydrogen space, and that is going to make a big difference in how or when we are able to actually achieve parity with the other hydrogen, gray and blue. So I think with that, I will hand it back to you, Bhumika. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mayank, for such a comprehensive vote of thanks, in fact. And I would just reiterate what you've already mentioned, and a heartfelt thank you to each and everyone who's been present with us till now. You will receive a follow-up email, all the participants who are here with us and who have joined the session. They'll receive a follow-up email in a couple of days. And you can, again, I mean, if you want to register, if you have not yet registered for the third session, you can register. You should also follow up our social media channels. The information would be there in the emails itself, so that you can keep a tab of upcoming events and you do not miss any of such interesting events. The next session, which is now on December 12th, would be on risk management for GH2 projects and global perspective, standards, policies, and regulations. There has been a lot of, we have received a lot of questions on the PPTs and in the chat box, in the Q&A box also. The PPTs would be available, but it will be only after the 3 sessions are over. So we'll keep you informed about that, where it is uploaded and when it is uploaded. So please do follow our social media channels and do join us for the next session. Also, to all our speakers, again, I mean, thank you for taking time and sharing your knowledge with us. This added immense value to our event. Again, a big thank you to our backend team and also the audience. I mean, I already mentioned, but we did witness a huge number today as well. So we express our gratitude towards you, and also for your active engagement and thoughtful questions which were asked. Again, mentioning that we will be distributing a certificate. So please do join us for the third session as well, so that we can give you a comprehensive participation certificate. Do not miss any updates on the social media channels, and hope to see you again for the next sessions. I hope it was an enjoyable learning experience. Hope to see you next time. Namaskar.